What was your 1 in a million chance that you made and blew everyone's mind? I was taping some tracing wire to a natural gas line that we were installing. When I pulled the wire tight, it snapped against the pipe and it ended up hitting a wasp that was on the pipe, perfectly beheading it. Beheading? I ran out of gas while driving at full speed once and managed to coast over a mile and come to a stop right at a gas pump. I had a lot on my mind. I was going through a divorce, you see, and simply just didn't think about filling the gas tank. I didn't even notice I was out of gas until I felt the acceleration was no longer working. I turned down my music just in time to hear the engine sputter out. I quickly popped my car into neutral, turned on the hazard lights, and began coasting as long as I could. By the time I reached the gas station, I was doing about 4 miles per hour and had just enough momentum to make it up the embankment and to the pump. I didn't even brake until my gas cap was adjacent to the nozzle. Freshman year of high school, I was talking to a friend, walking in the hallway, chewing gum. The gum flew out of my mouth accidentally, and I panicked and kicked my foot hacky sack style and kicked the gum right back into my mouth. My friend said it was gross to keep chewing the foot gum, but I said it was an act of God. I was playing kickball in my neighborhood street with a bunch of friends and a few cute girls around. I was always pretty good, so people always backed up when I was kicking. I got pitched the ball, and when I kicked it, it soared up into the air, up the street, and straight into my friend's basketball hoop. It was a good 35 yards away. The sound it made was the best swish I've ever heard. To this day, I've never made that shot again. I was sitting in a bar one time next to a pool table. The guy knocked the cue ball off, knocked the beer out of my hand, but I caught the ball. Everything was fine. The guy bought me another round. I was playing beer pong with some friends at the shore. The ball got a dent in it, so I was thinking, I'm hot stuff. I'm going to try the old lighter trick to pop the dent out. Well, as it turns out, if you get the lighter too close, the ball just catches on fire rather quickly. So instead of dropping the ball or blowing it out, I tossed the ball and sank the final cup with a flaming ball of glory. It might not be a 1 in a million shot, but it sure felt like one. I imagine the awesome factor was somewhat lessened for whoever had to drink the awful cocktail of beer and toxic burnt plastic. But you know what? If you're already a few rounds in at that point, then that's the kind of thing you might do anyway. Play on, folks. I was shooting at 2-liter bottles in New Hampshire with a BB shooter without much success. I decided I'd gangster things up a bit and turned the weapon on its side and fired. I hit the bottle at just the right spot so that the BB bounced back and hit me in the forehead. Also, one time my cousin threw a boomerang and it came back and hit him in the forehead. We have big foreheads. 5 heads? My dad once decided it would be really interesting to try and throw 2 boomerangs at once, so he stacked them together and had at it, and it worked perfectly at first. During flight, the boomerangs had separated, one moving ahead and slightly above the second. I was well back out of the return zone. My brother, however, was right up next to our dad. So when they came back, he was in the line of fire, and being rather young, he hadn't really mastered catching a boomerang and decided getting out of the way was the best option. He ducked under the first, only to have the second one catch him squarely in the face when he stood up. I remember a lot of screaming, but no permanent damage was done. The next day, not having learned our lesson, I caught my granddad in the back with a poorly thrown boomerang. Those things are dangerous, mate. I was playing baseball when I was around 10. I think I was playing first base and wasn't paying attention, and all of a sudden, a ball landed in my glove without me realizing. The pitcher threw it and the batter hit a straight line drive to me. I'll never be able to do that again, even if I try. I was miles away from home. I crossed the road behind a bus when a car came down the other side of the road and nearly knocked me over. I was okay, the car was braking. I hadn't looked where I was walking and just popped out behind the bus, so I expected the owner of the car to yell at me. I looked up and lo and behold, it was my dad, driving home from the shop. It must have been 1,000,000 to 1 odds that it was him, as I live in quite a large city. Also, I learned my lesson about crossing behind buses, and he gave me a lift home. I flipped a coin in my garage and it got stuck in the rafters. I walked away, disappointed. 5 days later, I was walking to my car and it fell down into the shoe I was wearing. I had my phone connected to its charging cord once and I was holding it and accidentally dropped it. The cord caught on the side of my end table, making the phone do an Indiana Jones-style vine swing on the cord. When it reached the apex of its swing, it detached from the cord, spun in the air, and landed upright in the seat of my chair facing me. I actually thought it was sentient for a second. Oh, I'm very glad my story will never happen again. I was walking into the pool room of a pub to join my friends sitting in the corner. As I opened the door, time slowed down. I noticed an exquisite detail just how the person taking their shot mucked it up, sending the ball flying. I saw the perfect parabola of the cue ball in the air tracing the curve of its majestic flight, right into my family jewels. Ouch. I was waitressing, and one evening when carrying out food, I tripped and fell. One plate just dropped all over the floor, smashing into a million pieces of food and china. The other plate slid across the floor and came to a stop right next to the foot of the customer who had ordered that meal. In middle school, my friends and I were joking around. I forget exactly what about, but for some reason I'd said something about hiding a body in a locker, and I turned to the nearest locker, the kind with a combination lock built in. I playfully tried to open it up as part of the joke. I randomly twisted the lock and pulled the handle, and the damn thing just opened. And inside was a black garbage bag with something big inside. I was completely floored by my dumb luck. They thought I'd planned it. Also, the first thing we found when we opened the bag was clothes, which freaked us out, but then it was just a bunch of notebooks and stuff. Phew. I was acting in a play and whipped my head to the right to react to what another character was saying. This was something I did every night in rehearsals, but for some reason, on opening night, my glasses shot right off my face. They just went flying. I have no idea, but I immediately caught them with my already outstretched hand. The audience ate that up. They applauded like this was a tricky maneuver I'd practiced every night. But it was literally something I could never do again. 2 minutes later, I whipped my head to the left to react to another character, and the glasses went airborne again, smacking the actress in the face and falling behind a prop so that they couldn't be easily recovered. The first time I ever played 2048 and won, I thought that was incredibly easy and didn't play again for a while. Since then, it's become increasingly popular, and I realized that what I'd done was actually quite a feat. I've since played countless times, and I'm convinced that given a million tries, I'll never win again. Well, the narrator read this comment, decided to go and try this game mid-recording, set his entire schedule back by half an hour, and got less than a 16th of the required score to win. That game seems very hard to me, so well done you! I believe I was 13 years old at the time. I was fishing off the dock of my parents' beach house. I went to cast and released the fishing line into the air. A seagull was flying by at the exact time, and the hook got attached to the bird. I caught a mother-frickin' seagull with my fishing rod. I tried to reel the seagull in to remove the hook from its mouth, but the bird was having none of that. It was kind of flying like a kite until I decided to cut the fishing line. Years ago, I was ice skating when I saw a group of my school friends. They were obviously there for the first time and kind of shuffle sliding out to the center of the rink in a group of 4 without taking their feet off the ice. I was still new at this too and not very good, but I skated over to say hello. As I came up in front of them, I realized I was going too fast and tried to slow down, and I overbalanced. I fell forward with my hand out. The heel of my hand landed on the ice, and I did a perfect circle about 8 foot wide around it with my skates opposed to each other before I managed to remove my hand and stand upright again. Frickin' show-off, one of my friends grumbled. I was walking into the men's room while chewing gum and realized I didn't want the gum anymore. I spat the gum out and kicked it mid-air into a tiny bin about 10 meters away. Made me feel like Zlatan. I once squashed a fly mid-air with a sausage tong. The 5 or so family members that were there didn't even believe me when I showed them the fly remains on the tip of the tongs. This is my single greatest achievement in life. When I was just a young lad, I was eating a meatball when my friend said something funny. A chunk of meatball about the size of a small marble was thrust from my nose like a cannon. My friend's dog caught the meaty marble mid-air and ate it. I peaked too early, you guys. When I was in high school, I was talking to a friend in the gym after school while chewing gum. She turned her head while I was talking, and just as she did, I accidentally spit my gum directly at her temple. I snapped my hand out in front of me, caught the gum, put it back in my mouth, just as she turned back. Didn't notice at all. I silently applauded my sudden onset spidey reflexes and went on with the conversation as if nothing had happened. I kicked a volleyball into a trash can about 100 feet away. There were witnesses. Casually dropped 2 coins on a table when the one coin started spinning on top of the other, slowing down to a halt, still standing sideways. I've tried to do it again, but it's absolutely impossible. My ex-girlfriend and I were leaving the local coffee shop. I drove away without knowing she left her phone on the roof. Made the turn onto a busy main street, and through the crack of her open window, the phone flew in and landed in her lap. What a frickin' shock. She lost it maybe 2 weeks later. I still don't know what wonder of physics made that happen. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. 4 a.m. I was hungry, so I went to Dunkin' Donuts. I grabbed whatever money I have in the car, turns out to be $4.63. So I go make my usual order completely oblivious to the fact that I have no money. The register shows my total, $4.63 frickin' cents. I just emptied my hand to the dude at the counter, he knows what just happened and gave me a nod of approval. I drove away with my donuts and wraps like a mother frickin' boss. I was playing football or soccer in a park with about 6 or 7 friends when a family walked by and the eldest daughter, who must have been at least 20, shouted that, "If that fricking ball comes near me, I will pop it." I considered this to be completely rude and uncalled for as we were just playing a nice game in the middle of a park. As the family walked away, I could see her walking like she was some frickin' awesome B-word for throwing out a needless threat to a bunch of kids. So I thought to myself, I'm gonna teach this lady. So I took the ball in my hands and kicked it towards her, assuming, because I'm not at all athletic or skilled, that it would go nowhere near her. But by some divine intervention, it conked her straight on the head from 50 yards. The rest of the family laughed really hard at her, so she was too embarrassed to steal the ball and pop it, and her dad threw it back to us. I was carrying 2 punnets of raspberries to the counter in the supermarket when the top one slid off and fell. It rotated 360 degrees and I dropped to my knees and caught it on top of the remaining punnet. Well, I can tell the author here is under a certain age because my knees were already cracking in sympathy. I don't care if I'm dropping a priceless porcelain vase, there is no way in hell I'm dropping knees first into a hard floor voluntarily. I got a house under contract to buy at $42,000. On the drive back to my office, I stopped to let a farmer know that one of his cows was out of the fence by the highway. He thanked me and saw my shirt that said, "I buy houses," and he asked me if I had any for sale. I said, yes. It was the one I'd just gotten under contract. I sold it to him for $60K. I made $15,000 in about 3 hours of work. 2 things for me. First, I was driving on the highway after a very bad winter storm, lots of ice. My car started doing the wiggle. Next thing I know, I'm spinning. I screamed out of reflex and saw the guy driving in the car next to me with his shocked face. I landed perfectly straight and kept going. I'll never forget that guy's face, and I'll never forget the pair of pants that I lost that day. And the second? Well, I was playing World Series Baseball on the Sega Genesis, so like 1994, 95, my cousin was kicking my butt. He had the bases loaded and was down by 1 point, 0 outs. Hits a line dive and I made my short stop dive for it, but instead of diving forward, he did his dive where his body was facing the wrong direction, so he sort of dove backwards towards the ball, then proceeded to get a triple play. I ended up winning. We watched the replay of my triple play for like 30 minutes. It was so unbelievable. Finally, my brother. We went to a house party and just got hammered. We were playing quarters, the game where you bounce quarters off a table into a shot glass. I don't even remember the rules. I just remember doing that. Looking around the table, there was a guy with a paper bag on his head and another guy with a lampshade on. Everyone was just smashed. My brother says, "If I land this, you all have to chug hard liquor. If I lose, I'll do it," and proceeds to fill glasses with hard liquor. He puts down 2 shot glasses and everyone is thinking there's no way he'll land 2. He then tilts his head back and puts the quarters over his eyes, slams his head forward and lands both quarters in both shot glasses. The table erupts. Chairs are thrown backwards and broken, eruption of screaming. I ended up blacking out thanks to the large amounts of Beefeater I drank that night. Good times. Back when I was new to Street Fighter, my friend invited me to a tournament. The thing is, I didn't know how to play. I won by mashing buttons. $200. I could never do that again even if I tried knowing the game better. I guessed an activation code for a Flight Simulator 98 game that I stole. No joke. One of the first times I played Zombies Call of Duty online, I made it to level 40. I tried and tried many times later and never made it past 30. Oh, there was this one time. Back when I was just this little white fishy guy fresh out of my dad, I penetrated this huge frickin' thing and got born. This one time, I saw the DVD logo hit the corner of the screen. My mouth fired saliva like a water gun once, no idea why. I thought I was a Pokemon. I was in a musical a few years ago, and one of the characters had to drop some coins. All goes well for the first few nights, then one night he drops them and one rolls down the stairs and halfway down the theatre to the audience, whereupon it stops at the feet of a 3-year-old girl who at this point realizes she is the chosen one and has magic powers, and screams loudly and excitedly for an impressive amount of time during the rest of the play. Yay! At my ex-girlfriend's new loft apartment, it was 2 stories with the main living area, kitchen and stuff downstairs and the bedroom upstairs with a half wall, I used to throw things off her upstairs wall at her cat. Socks, primarily. One day I had a nickel in my pocket and I noticed an open, half-full Snapple bottle on the other side of the room downstairs, so like 15 feet away and 10 feet below me. I asked if she bet me I couldn't make it in. She humored me and said, "Sure, what's the bet?" I said, "If I miss, I'll never throw anything downstairs again." And if I made it, she had to give me a down-under kiss and swallow, which she hated, right then and there on the couch. She also hated doing anything on the couch. My girlfriend accepted. I fully expected to miss, but I lined up, did a couple of fake pumps and threw it. 2 seconds later, you heard the perfect clink and kasploosh. I ran around the apartment celebrating like I got the winning goal in OT in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup, and my girlfriend even paid up. In short, I threw a nickel into an open Snapple bottle 15 feet away and 10 feet below me. I got some action. I'm Australian. It was just a normal summer day and I'd finished eating an icy pole and still had the stick in my hand. I walked into the games room to play the PlayStation when I saw there was a huge white-tailed spider sitting on the wall. I said, "Screw this," and casually tossed the stick towards it. Somehow it hit like a spear right between the abdomen and main body and sliced it clean in half. The spider didn't even move. Its abdomen and the stick fell to the floor and it was left dead sitting on the wall. I 360 no-scoped a bottle into a rubbish bin at school once. My life can only go downhill from there. Is there any other way than no-scoping when it comes to throwing a bottle? The person who asked this last question makes a valid point, but still, the act of successfully hitting anything with an aimed projectile after a 360 turn in mid-air is impressive. Maybe not 1,000,000 to 1 impressive like some of these others, but hey, if that's the high point of your life, well done you. I played hockey when I was younger and I was terrible. I was 4th line forward, who maybe scored 1 garbage goal per season. I was skating out of my zone and I shot the puck from center ice to go on a line change, and I ended up sniping it top right side. I didn't even see the puck go in because immediately after I shot it, I was skating to the bench to complete the change. I asked junior Senator Barack Obama at the time he was campaigning for presidency to take my phone that already had my mother on the other line and wish her a happy birthday. He talked to her for about 3 minutes while his security guards mouthed "F you" and basically resembled exaggerated cartoon bullies. They apparently didn't like the idea of this and made it more than clear. I'd once lost a DS game. After hours of searching, I still couldn't find it. My room then could be described as a pigsty, so I had no idea where it could be. In a fit of rage, I kicked a pile of clothes as high as I possibly could. Most of them fell on my own head, and when I shook my head to get them off, the DS game fell out of the pile and onto my DS, which was sitting on my bed. Okay, hold on to your socks, people. I think I've got the craziest one. I correctly inserted a flash drive into a USB port on the first try. I was in a hotel parking lot, about to leave Vermont and head home from my friend's wedding. I was with a couple of friends, hopping into my car when I noticed my empty juice bottle from the ride up was on the floor of the car. I see a trash can all the way at the beginning of the parking lot, back by the hotel, maybe 50 to 60 feet away. A couple of things. First, this trash can had a top on it, and 2, this bottle was completely empty plastic, with very little weight to it. Basically, I was going to have to hurl it as hard as I could to even get close. I have no idea if I can even throw it far enough. So I said something along the lines of, "Check out this, motherfuckers," and chucked the bottle in a majestic parabola shape towards the trash can. It must have hit an updraft or something because it made it all the way. It hit the outer rim, spun a full time around the rim, and then dropped into the hole beautifully. Best throw of my life. Did I mention there were about 4 or other 5 carloads of people in the parking lot at that very moment? I proceeded to sprint around the parking lot, arms out like an airplane, high-fiving everyone in the parking lot who was getting in their cars. I swatted a bee with my hand and somehow removed its head. I am the king of the north. As a side note, the body kept moving for like another 15 minutes. That twitch made me nervous. I live next to a golf course, so when golf balls fly into our yard, I hit them back. One day I had 2 balls fly in, so I took my 7-iron, and instead of flying over back to the golf course, I smacked it right into a telephone pole, and the ball came flying back at me. I had to swat it away with my left hand. I kinda chuckled and hit the second ball, and the same exact thing happened. Whew! What obvious signals did you have to give to your crush that flew right over their head? I was pursuing him hard. He was making me dinner at his house and we were chatting. He makes a joke about the hoops he'd have to jump through to get a classy woman like me to sleep with him. I respond with, "It wouldn't take all that for you to get me in your bed," as I flirtatiously grin at him and roll my eyes towards his bedroom. He laughs and responds with, "So, what do you like on your salad?" Thankfully, I didn't give up on that dork and now we're happily living together in the mountains. Hey, computer store guy, the best response to, "Hey, let me have your number so we can study at my place sometime," is not to roll your eyes and say, "Oh yeah, because you're so much smarter than me. I don't need help. I'm fine." Though watching your coworker silently lose his crap in the background was reward enough for that interaction. Look, I knew he liked me. I got in prime kissing position, as in my lips way too close to his to be mistaken for anything else, and he still did nothing. So I kissed him, he barely kissed me back, and when I pulled away and smiled at him, he said, "I'm confused," and genuinely looked like he didn't believe that what had just happened was real. We've been together 7 years now, 3 of which we've been married. He still has moments weekly where I see that same cute, disbelieving expression on his face, and he'll hug me and say, "Are you sure this is real? It's too good to be true." Many girls gave me attention in high school, so I figured that meant we were all good friends, and I never tried anything. Years later, I find out that I was basically on The Bachelor but held off on dating my friends for so long that they all figured I was gay or uninterested, so they moved on. But actually, I'm just dumb. Life sucks sometimes. Every time I read a girl's signals as being glaringly obvious, I always just end up having been led on by an overly flirtatious friend. It blows, so I don't blame you. I outright told him I liked him. He laughed and went, "Okay, where are the cameras?" I'm female, had a guy tell me straight out he liked me in high school. My response? You shouldn't joke about stuff like that, you could hurt someone's feelings. Had a girl in high school tell me she liked me. I thought it was a joke for about 3 weeks. Then I finally said okay and agreed to a date. Turns out, my instincts were right and it was just a joke that 6 or 7 girls got in on. Same thing happened to me, only except it was a prom date. Needless to say, it took a long time to figure out my current fiancé liked me. So we have some contention about whether outright telling someone that you're romantically interested in them is an actual signal. That's how crappy the playing field is out there for some people, I guess. At least I would assume that most of these seem to be younger people, so us crusty older people likely have it easier on that front. This was one that happened to me. I'm a girl, but I might as well share it anyway. There was this guy in my class in elementary school, and he told me he had a crush on a girl in our class, and if I could guess who, he'd tell me. I guessed every girl in my class, and he said no to them all, so I eventually just assumed he was messing with me and gave up. It took me 10 years to realize that I'd forgotten to guess myself. I sat on his lap, I put his arms around my waist, rested my head on his shoulder, and held onto his hands. He still had no idea that I liked him. Hold on a second. Holding hands and resting your head on his shoulders was a sign of interest? Frick! My high school crush did that to me whenever she had the opportunity to do so. She'd even rest her head on my lap a few times when we were alone. God damn it. I guess it was a little past crush at this point, but we were on a date and he asked me to be his girlfriend. I said, "Well, I don't even know what it's like to kiss you." And he goes, "Oh, okay." I was like, "That's your cue," and kissed him. It was kind of cute. I really can be an incredibly dumb guy about these sorts of things. Met her in the bar, lots of dancing together, drinks, her hand sitting on my thigh all the time as we sat. She asked me to walk her home, saying no one is home and she feels unsafe. I agree, in front of her home we stand there, she takes initiative and kisses me. I literally jump up because I was looking just past her face at this new Audi driving up the hill kinda half zoned out. I still feel so sorry for that girl. We hung out often. The last birthday of his was a hot day in July. I texted him, 95% of females who know better would be down for skinny dipping tonight. He responded, That activity sounds like it's lacking in morals. Me? Makes sense, I have few morals. Actual conversation between me and my now ex-boyfriend. I brought some new leopard skin undies. I can't wait for you to see them. I brought printer ink today. Dang it, story time from my perspective. Hindsight is 2020. At work with this girl, Kay. She comes to my house a lot. Spends time watching TV, joking around, snacking. I think just having fun together as friends because 1. I've never been in a relationship before, I was about 21 at the time, and 2. I was raised in a super conservative Christian home. Anyways, one day her best friend is hanging out with me and asking tons of questions about how I feel about Kay. You two are spending a lot of time together, are you gonna ask her out? Of course I respond with, how we're just friends, she shouldn't worry about it, blah blah. I'm so bad at hints, it's painful. Fast forward a week or so, Kay is over at my house super late and decides she isn't going home. She'll just sleep at my place. I insisted on sleeping on the couch. She was having none of it. I find a compromise and sleep in pajamas for the first time in more than 10 years, and sleep under the blanket, but not the sheets, so we're not actually touching. She gets super cuddly, and I roll over and go to sleep. In short, girl tries to get busy with me, and I just assume she's too lazy to drive home. I don't remember exactly when I clicked as to what had been going on. I just thought about it one day way later, and my reaction was something along the lines of, damn, I was an idiot. She was a great girl, and by the time I realized, we'd grown apart long since with her moving away. I said, I want to F you, and he said, thanks. Although another time I texted a guy I wanted to sit on his face, and 20 minutes later I was doing just that. You win some, you lose some, I guess. As a guy to whom this has been said, I actually responded with thanks too. At the spur of the moment, it was the first thing that came to mind that didn't sound like an outright rejection, but was an attempt to say, I take that as a compliment, but I do not reciprocate. Not my smoothest moment, but I thought it was slightly better than no thanks. Us guys aren't stupid, we're just scared of being hurt and tricked into embarrassment. And then sometimes just so gosh darn confused, because this girl is so fine that you just assume she's just being mates, even though you're picking up all the signs and ignoring them, and then finally having the balls to confront her about it, just as you find out she gave a down-under kiss to your best mate because she got bored of you. This may or may not have happened to me. I kissed my now boyfriend a year before we started dating. He thought I slipped. Like, oops, I accidentally sucked on your face. It doesn't mean anything though. He didn't know I liked him until I showed up at his basic training graduation. I attempted to low-key ask him to prom. Had to be cool about it, you know, nice and smooth. My phrasing was something along the lines of, maybe you and I should go to prom together. It'd be more fun than going alone. His response was just, yeah, maybe, before he walked away. I took this as a rejection and immediately ceased all my other genius attempts at flirting, such as hugging, touching his hair, letting him carry my bag to the bus. He just kinda did it. I never made him and it became a daily routine for us, and smiling at him and other such things. I thought I was so subtle, but almost everyone else knew. I found out years later that he honestly had been clueless, and the reason he had grown distant with me is he thought I didn't like him back. There is no hope for us human beings. Also, if anyone was wondering why the answers are so weighted towards the woman's perspective, it's because the original submission question was about how clueless men can be as to women hitting on them. Personally, I feel like I've met women who were as clueless as some of these guys, but there you go. Here's one from the perspective of the man being hit on. I have a feeling that if she were a Redditor, a friend of mine would be on here talking about me right now. I've known her for about 4 years. I've always had a crush on her, but when I brought it up a few years back, she gave me a lukewarm response. I never mentioned it again. Then last night, she got to talking about reaching that age where you want something comfortable to settle into, and she kept throwing hints about me. As much as I adore this girl and have wanted to date her for a long time, I didn't like the way she worded everything. It wasn't like, there's someone I like and I don't know how to tell them. It was more like, I want a relationship, but I don't want to date strangers. I guess that's why I spend time with you. You're comfortable. I like how comfortable we are together, but I also need passion. So I joked my way out of the awkwardness. I'm sure she thinks I didn't catch her hints. I did. I just want her to be interested in me because I'm special to her and she appreciates me. Not because I'm good enough and she doesn't feel like trying harder, you know? Lots of girls that were my friends that I thought were dropping hints turned out like this. I've had 4 friends say that, if we're still single when we're 30, I'll go out with you then. I'm sorry, but screw that. No better way to ruin a friendship.
I like you, but not enough to settle down while I'm still as hot as I am. Maybe after I've screwed all your friends, is how I hear it. Found someone who wanted me from the start, and we've been married almost 7 years now. I said I really care about you. He said, cool. He didn't get it. I said, no, I really care about you, like more than I care about most people. He said, oh, yeah, I like you too. We're now happily married. I find myself wondering when he will figure that out too. I used to sneak out and throw rocks at his window at night to let him come out and talk to me. Also used to organize friends' nights for the sole purpose of seeing him. Was a complete shock to him apparently when my friend drunkenly told him he was so blind to my crush on him. We've been dating for 6 years now. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. It's easy to dismiss this as he was clueless, but there's one alternative explanation. He just doesn't believe you could possibly like him and that it's some kind of mean practical joke that you and your friends will laugh about later. He actually thought I was serious? Yeah, low self-esteem is a B word. And yeah, I should have said at least one alternative, but I think the assumption here is that the guy is, in fact, interested, but he's missing the signals and has reasons why he's not taking the initiative. I never believed it was done for laughs, I just thought I couldn't possibly be the subject of their attraction. Like, what? Help me? Do you need a psych evaluation? This isn't normal. Amen. Listen to your heart, the brain is a butthole. Well, we were both really tipsy. She sat on my lap and said, I could never be with a guy like you, you're too nice. She was feeling my face and everything. I was confused, I had a rager, and was sad at the same time. Snapchats with a deep neckline. So much chest visible. Wait, what if I get a Snapchat from a girl about her tan lines and she only has a towel covering the bits they censor on TV? As a girl, that's pretty hardcore flirting. My fiancé had no idea I was hitting on him before we started dating. After spending a day together with our college club, we returned to the campus and I asked him if he was free anytime the next week to hang out. He just said, "No, I'm really busy," which he maintains to this day was true. Then a few weeks later, I tried to get him to hang out again and I pretended to send a mass text to see who was in town for spring break. It was my night off, so I hoped he would respond. The next day he texts me, "Here," and that was it. I was convinced he didn't like me, but several of my friends told me to just ask him out. When I finally worked up the courage, I was so nervous that I wasn't my usual happy or goofy self. I told him I needed to talk to him, and he thought he had made me angry. He had no idea I was interested until I asked him out, and he was really happy when I did. We've been together almost 5 years now. Back in high school, I was very close to this girl who was in my friend group. Me and her did everything together, like go to the movies without the others in the group, go on lunch dates. She had sleepover, we were basically a couple. I say basically because we all did this, but I wasn't dating her, or even tried, because I really thought she wasn't into me. But I mean, this girl literally would tell me things like, "I'd be happy if you were my first time," and she actually got undressed in front of me one day. I was just an extremely dense kid who assumed she was like this with all guys. On a happier note, I did end up dating her once I got to college, and we're still together now. The poor girl was probably so frustrated with you by the time you got the hint. She must really like you to have put up with that. In my defense, she later told me that when she would occasionally talk about guys to me, it was to try and make me jealous. Of course I was jealous, but I thought I had no right in judging who a friend liked. Sometimes we ignore your super obvious hints because we aren't interested. Sometimes we also ignore your super obvious hints because we're afraid of accidentally mixing up the signals and coming off as a creep. A friend told me she had a crush on a girl but didn't know if she was straight or not and couldn't figure out how to raise the subject. I gave her some mostly joking suggestions. I was the girl. It went so far over my head that I actually got jealous of the mystery girl. She's my girlfriend now and is still laughing about the fact that I was jealous of myself. Well, this one is a bit fairer than most of the others. It's hard to work out if someone bats for your team if you've only seen them date the opposite one, or haven't seen them date at all. I can understand them testing the waters a bit first, plus you gave jokey answers. Can you blame her? I'm the guy whose head it went over. After my first real date ever, though at the time I wasn't sure if it was a date, when I was 19 at the movies, I took her home. I offered to walk her to her door like a sir. When we're up there, she tells me I didn't have to do that, and I reply with something like, "Well, sometimes I like to pull out the old-school, traditional moves." She turns away from the key in her door, takes a slight step towards me and says, "Well, do you know any more of those traditional moves?" I fricking bow, tip my fricking hat, and fricking say something corny like, "I had a lovely time tonight, madam." I didn't realize what I'd missed until I was halfway home and I scared the people besides me at the light because I was screaming at the top of my lungs and pounding the dashboard. Telling that story still makes me mad at myself all these years later. I mean, I just kissed him because he wasn't taking any hint. Take control. If he likes you, it's a sure winner. I was part of an investigation into infidelity. I can't really go into detail about it, but the gist is that Jane Doe was cheating on her husband in the military with some other guy, Steve, on base. Or she was trying to. Suffice to say, that guy wasn't too bright. I mean, I met the guy, and Steve wasn't all there. Some say he knew and was trying to dissuade her, knowing she was married, but due to some other stuff I can't divulge, he probably just didn't have a fricking clue. Sweet guy, good man, but dumb. Jane was really trying to take advantage of his stupidity, his muscle, and getting nowhere. Reading the details in the text messages and so on was hilarious. I'm going to paraphrase some of them here. "I want to run barefoot through the fields with you. I grew up in Oklahoma. Those fields have cow pies. Gross. I can see my reflection in your eyes." It's the glasses. "Run away with me. Take me into your arms." "I have guard duty. My CO would have my butt." "I want that butt." "No, my CO is always telling me my butt is his." Huh? Have you ever wondered what true love is? Ever want to experience romance and deep desire, longing in winds of destiny? No. I'm so lonely. I want movies when I'm lonely. They got a theater on base. I think it's showing Titanic and Goonies. I want to be the rose to your Jack. My name is Steve. What do you think when you look up at the stars? I'm outside. I want you. I want you so bad. I know how that is. I want a good burger. But the ones they have here on base, the grill is only open till 8 and it's like 11. Oh my god, I want a burger so bad. What are you doing? Texting on Judy. What are you doing now? Texting on the pot. What are you doing after Judy? My CO caught me texting. Oh god, Steve. This question makes me sad because I never get a hint from any girl. Or perhaps you never noticed you received the hints from the girls. One time this girl who I knew had a crush on me somehow got my number and called me. She told me she liked me. I hung up the phone. Back when we had just met, my husband missed many of my extremely obvious and unsubtle hints. I'd say things like, "You should stay here and sleep with me tonight," and he'd say, "Oh no, I'm not tired yet, I'll just go home so you can sleep." Turns out he was super conscious of me being 17 instead of 18, he was in his early 20s. Once I turned 18, he suddenly became aware of all my not very subtle advances. Band trip to Universal. I'd purposefully chosen his group to walk around with and stayed mostly just hanging out with him. Always tried to sit next to him on rides that required the group to split. Second day of the trip, we went to the second park. We all got butterbeer and I didn't get a straw, so it was all over my top lip. He says, "If you were any other girl, I'd be all smooth and like, 'Here, let me help you with that,' and kiss you, but I don't think you're like that." I blush and say, "Well, how do you know I'm not like that?" No response. I sat next to him on the bus ride to and from Universal, even took home the stuffed dinosaur he won, and I'm pretty sure I brought him and his friend cheesecake, all while he was pining over some other girl. Apparently our friends were making bets on how long it would take us to get together. Took him a few weeks, but that's my boyfriend, everyone. Hi, sweetheart. I asked a guy if he'd bring some Xbox original games for us to play. In short, it was code for "We're going to bang." He brought over a big bag of games and we played them. I remember one was Time Splitters, which I freaking loved and wish I still had the means to play. I didn't tell him my original plan until a couple of years after we'd started going out. He was just so freaking cute, all super stoked that I wanted to game with him. I remember he came over a little later than planned because he'd been carefully selecting which games to bring. I married that goober. That is the worst "we will bang" hint in the fricking world. Really? That's what it's code for? Oh my god, all of my male friends want to do the deed with me. We would always hang out after classes on our own and I'd rest my head against his chest or lap, depending on whatever was comfiest, when we'd watch movies. I'd play with his hair a lot. I even kissed him on the cheek once. He had no idea. Oh wow, having read this thread, I think a dear friend might be into me. Oh crap. Gorgeous Russian blonde sat next to me in the study hall for a year in high school. Every day we'd push our desks together and playfully kick each other under the desk, hide each other's stuff and do homework together. After I moved states, she berated me for how oblivious I was. In my defense, I was a lanky nerd with low self-esteem. Some of us are very good at rationalizing away hints that we've noticed. For example, I've literally been making out with a girl who told me she is only physical when there's a meaning, then a day later convinced myself it didn't mean that she liked me. Talking on Facebook, I mentioned a new bar near where I worked, and he said he'd never heard of it. I said they had really good Bloody Marys. He said he didn't like mixed drinks. Then I read a Reddit thread about guys, when have you realized too late that she was flirting with you, and realized he had no clue that I wanted to go out for drinks. So I messaged him again and was more blunt about it. We're now married and expecting our second boy any day now.
What did you do that unintentionally destroyed someone's life completely? When I was about 8 years old, I was playing golf with another friend. I went for a swing and ended up splitting his jaw into like 10 parts or so. He now speaks a little bit odd 15 years later. I introduced my then roommate to Final Fantasy XI, dropped out of his full-ride scholarship, and dedicated his life to that game. I've known a lot of people who have their entire lives revolve around MMOs, myself included. They can be just as damaging to a person as substances if not careful. Addiction doesn't need an external chemical component. Sometimes the chemical releases from our brains while doing certain activities is enough to cause real addiction. Gaming addiction is as real as gambling and shopping addiction. But I also think someone has to have some issues to begin with for the addiction to be able to take hold. There was obviously something this person was trying to escape from before they were introduced to the game. Happy people don't develop life-destroying addictions. So you know that guy, Count Dankula, who taught his pug to be a far-right extremist and is now facing hate crime charges? I know I'm probably not really the cause, but I posted his video to Reddit because I found it on YouTube with a few thousand views. Then it sort of went viral on Reddit and ended up with millions of views. The attention it got caused him to be arrested for hate crimes, and now he potentially faces years in prison and difficulty finding a job ever again if found guilty. I know it probably would have still gone viral if I didn't post it here, eventually, but I can't help but feel a bit guilty for being the one who first posted to Reddit. Hope the poor guy doesn't get charged. A new guy at my old job, Bill, was bragging about his hot new girlfriend, Cassie. At our college party before we went on leave for 2 weeks, I saw him with a very pretty blonde just kind of standing around. Since he was new, I decided to help break the ice, show them around and meet some people. I walk over, introduce myself, say hi to Bill and then say, "And you must be his girlfriend, Cassie. He's told us some great things about you." He goes as white as a ghost. "No, I'm his wife, Rachel." I didn't know what to do, so I made an excuse that I must have mixed them up with another couple, and made my escape. They got divorced a couple of months later. You know what? I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Bill absolutely had that one coming. He really set himself up for marital self-destruction in multiple stages, and we only have to feel bad for Rachel for not getting out sooner. Pat, the alcoholic regular at the truck stop I used to work night shifts at. He used to come in every night for a bottle of Rumplemans before heading home. He was clearly a drunk, but a friendly and good-natured one. One day, he stopped coming in and nobody saw him for over a year. Then during my last week on the job, he comes in to get gas, and I'm so glad to see him that I brought his traditional bottle of booze for him as a gift since I was leaving. 6 months later, I learned that he disappeared for that year to cut his ties to the area, and moved to the West Coast to sober up and get his life together. He'd managed to kick the booze and start rebuilding his life when he came back to town to pick up some things from his old home before leaving the area forever. He was on his way out of town toward a new life when I gave him that bottle. He relapsed and self-deleted a few months later. Not to sound callous, but I've never really felt guilty about it. There's no way I could have known, and I'm sure there were other factors. I do feel sadness, though, that the world lost a good-hearted man who was struggling with his own demons. I am an alcoholic. Most likely he'd already relapsed in his brain. Most people don't relapse when they're sober and are handed a bottle of alcohol. He'd probably been struggling for weeks or days, or had been planning on moving so he could drink without people knowing. Even if you didn't give him a bottle, he probably would have just bought his own eventually. Alcoholism is a pretty crappy disease. My parents. I came from an upper middle-class family, so my parents paid for everything while I was in college. Housing, tuition, groceries, everything. I had my dad's credit card, and at 20 I started going out to the bar and spending lots of money. They continued to support me, to pay for everything, and I continued to take full advantage for years while ignoring their threats that they would shut off the credit card, which they never did. Then my dad sent me a heartbreaking email one day that said I'd spent all of his retirement money and they were struggling to pay the mortgage. It absolutely broke my heart, and I cry just thinking about it. It ruined my relationship with my parents. It's been a few years and I'm making quite a bit of money now. Our relationships are better than they've ever been. At any opportunity I can, I send them money and will continue to do so until they tell me to stop. I'll forever be indebted to them for everything they've done for me, and I'll do anything I can to help them live comfortably for the rest of their lives, because that's what they've done for me. To those who grow up in a loving family, don't ever forget how much your parents love you. Don't ever take it for granted like I did. The one that I'm now trying to unscrew up is my kids' dental health. I spent a few years caring more about pills than I did taking my kids to the dentist or just brushing regularly. Now when I have to take a kid to the dentist to repair the cavities and or root canals that I caused them to need, I feel really bad and admit I effed up, and now they're paying for me messing up their lives even in just this one way. When I was 6 years old, I was running around a portable classroom at school while some other older kid was running around in the opposite direction for his own reasons. Our paths converged at the corner and we smashed heads. My forehead was split wide open and I got 13 stitches and still have a straight line scar in the middle of my forehead to remember it by. The other kid, being a few years older and a few inches taller, wasn't so lucky. His eyeball ruptured. I can still hear his screams. I tracked him down on Facebook all these years later to ask if he'd ever want a beer with me, and his response was pretty much, "Yeah, nah, I'm good." I introduced a friend to anime and watched Madoka with him. Ever since then, he's developed a very particular interest for younger anime girls and spends most of his time watching more anime and splurges heavily on figurines, amongst other things. By sophomore year of college, I'd figured out a pretty good rhythm for partying really hard while still getting good grades. At the beginning of the semester, a friend of a friend joined our group. He was a freshman, super smart and also extremely straight edge. He had never drank or had ever really been to a party. None of us pressured him into anything, just invited him to join us. But he started getting into the college party vibe pretty quickly. I guess I just assumed everyone had the same work ethic towards school as me. Even though I went out a lot, like a lot, I still studied every night and never missed assignments. But apparently my new friend didn't get quite as good a rhythm. He started to miss class more and more, went out more and more, and forgot about major projects, amongst other blunders. He ended up failing his first semester of college, and last I heard of him, he joined the military and shipped out overseas. No clue where he ended up. I'll say it doesn't seem so much like he ruined his life as he just didn't try to find the right balance to make himself succeed at school. And joining the military wasn't necessarily a bad thing for him. I know at least one person who was a bit of a screw-up before they joined the armed forces and really got their life together after their service, and even went back to finish their education in a path they knew they wanted to do once they'd had some more time to think and some savings. It was middle school and we were taking one of those state-based tests. I don't really remember the name, but it was the history portion. Our history teacher wasn't the nicest woman and she wasn't fair, so no one was really thrilled to be in her class that day. I remember sitting down, carrying my backpack and tossing it to the side. I was in a bad mood, so I just kind of threw it down, not really caring about it. I just wanted to get this test over with and then take a nap, because they made us put our head down when we're done. 20 minutes into the test and I'm blazing through it. I do love history, so I had no problem, despite our mean teacher. And she was walking along each aisle, checking each person, making sure nobody was cheating. One kid already was yelled at, so we were afraid to look up. I saw her shadow appear from the side, slowly walking down the aisle. Afraid to look up, I stared at my paper, but a scream next to me spiked my head up. "Ah!" She wailed as her elderly body went flying, her body landing on the ground with a big whomp. She had tripped on my backpack. I looked down in shock. "I can't get up! I can't get up!" She wailed on the ground. I was frozen in fear when a teacher's aide ran to her aid. "Go get the principal! Everyone out of class!" she yelled. We were all rushed into the hall, more teachers arrived, and then the principal. An ambulance came there, as there was a hospital close by, and then she was taken away. "Did you trip the teacher?" John tripped the teacher." It spread like wildfire. I was suddenly the kid who'd tripped the teacher. The next day we had a substitute and the principal in the class with us as we were about to finish the tests. "This is why you're supposed to tuck your backpacks under your desk, not in the aisles." I never got in trouble for it, and it was never pushed to my family. We got a replacement teacher who was actually really cool, and history became a lot more fun again. I learned later our history teacher did come back. She'd damaged her arm and hip permanently, needing a walker. She was getting medically retired, but came to say hello to some old students. I never saw her, but one of my best friends did. The teacher commented on, "It's important to forgive, especially those who've wronged you." And she stared directly at my best friend at this time, knowing she and I were close. The history teacher left the school that day, never to be seen again. In short, historical progress goes whomp. So a lot of arguments are seeming to pop up, so I want to say this. This was about how I unintentionally messed up someone's life, not how they messed themselves up next to me. I left the backpack there and she got hurt. She didn't deserve what happened to her, even as much as I didn't like her. In my mind, it's still both funny and horrifying to me, even after almost 2 decades. So don't be that kid. Tuck away your bag.
You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe.
Introduced my classmate to League of Legends last year. Since then, he stopped showing up to school for weeks at a time and then he dropped out. And now he has no plans to do anything but play League all day, every day. My best mates when we were 14 and 15. He was a typical rich kid whose parents paid for whatever he wanted. He was pretty spoiled, but he also understood that you have to work to get things. His dad taught him well. Well, anyway, I got some green herb off of another guy in school and gave him his first session, and after that, we were smoking all the time. He moved back up north not long after and hit the hard stuff, and is now smoking a lot of crystal. I know it's not completely my fault, but I can't help but think if I hadn't given him that session, he would never have got into the heavier substances. According to my ex-wife, I single-handedly ruined her life. Seems to me that if you have a lesbian affair and then empty the bank account before filing for divorce, and my lawyer gets the courts to make you pay me a lot of money, you may have some responsibility in your own demise. Back in the day, I had an extra beta key for City of Heroes, an MMO, which I gave to a friend. He met some girl in the game and they hit it off. Problem was, she was extremely needy and slightly crazy. Told him he doesn't need friends since he's got her. And besides, we're all bad influences anyway. So they broke contact and moved to a new city. More than 15 years of friendship gone. If I'd never given him the beta key, he would never have met her. Probably. There's a lot of people in this group of stories feeling terrible for something that's only really partially on them, where someone else ultimately made the fatal decision. There was as much of a chance of him meeting this person as there were chances of meeting an equally terrible person in any other social forum, real life or online. It was just a freak chance that he met them in the thing you gave him. Your friend and this woman did all the destroying themselves. I can't blame myself too much, but this is all pretty recent, so I feel a little responsible. My best friend growing up used to have his grandpa take us home every day together. In high school, my best friend growing up dated this girl. They dated roughly 2 to 3 weeks and then ended it, so it wasn't very serious at all. Over a year later, I somehow ended up getting close to her and asked my friend if it was okay because of their previous relationship. He said it was fine and to go for it. Well, I did, and he didn't take it too well, but didn't really show it. Me and him had naturally grown apart at this time, and we're still good friends, just didn't hang out together daily. He was a bigger kid, but after that, he started losing weight like crazy. Then, not long after, the remains of his father's body were found. He took this really hard, obviously. We grew completely apart and I continued dating this girl through high school until we broke up senior year. He couldn't handle seeing us around each other, so we pretty much stopped talking altogether. Freshman year of college, though, we reconnected and spent some time together. It started becoming more frequent, and he was coming to parties with me and we'd hang out at his house. Around this time, though, I reconnected with this girl. We had some time apart, and getting back together at our age, we were taking it seriously. My friend didn't disappear this time, but I did notice he'd slowly been drinking more. He was already drinking heavily before we got back together, but I thought it was just like all of us college kids were doing. We all drank, smoked, and generally did nothing if it wasn't schoolwork. One night, though, I went to his house and noticed it was a bit much.
I watched him drinking full glasses of gin and eventually blacking out in the backyard. I moved him to his bed and his girlfriend watched him all night. This was the last time we talked and he removed all communication with me. Years go by and I tried to reach back out. Him and his girlfriend had a kid but broke up. He had blocked me on Facebook and if I tried to text or call, he just wouldn't answer. Time just kept going and I always thought about him. 3 weeks ago, I got a call that he'd pulled out a piece and self-deleted in his driveway. You can't help but wonder what you could have done or how much you contributed. I wish I'd reached out. I don't think just the girl coming between us was the sole reason at all, but he had said to his ex that he'd thought about self-deleting before. He said he couldn't do anything right and he didn't have anyone to turn to. His life didn't go how it should have at all. He was top of our class and had such potential, but decided to go to a smaller school at home. He failed out and stopped going while the rest of us moved on with our lives. I wish I would have tried more. Incredibly stupid coworker sent an email to my business account calling in sick. Unfortunately, I was sick that day too and her husband was my stand-in. He read that mail and called a divorce lawyer because his wife had left the house as usual. When she came home from work, her lover's bed, her husband had already organized a removal company. Sorry, not sorry, cheaters deserve the worst and she destroyed her own life. What I did was completely unintentional though. Chatting about people in relationships and whatnot with my colleagues. Chill conversation, friendly banter, then said something about another colleague apparently being with another colleague. I was given such a weird look. A boss asked me where I'd heard that, to which I replied another colleague who was on sick leave at the time because of surgery. They nodded knowingly and we began talking about the weather or something. The colleague on sick leave was fired because they weren't supposed to tell people about the other two being together apparently. My workplace has a good reputation in the industry and our boss has a lot of connections. If they attempt to get a job in the industry anywhere in the future, they're going to get a less than stellar review from the boss, and will probably have an extremely difficult time finding a job. Whoops. I guess you could describe him as the trenchcoat kid of my middle school. Let's call him Bob, because I don't want to keep referring to him as trenchcoat kid, it just feels wrong. Bob was a pretty troubled kid and was picked on quite a bit by people. One day our class was at a nearby park for a kind of relaxing field trip after midterms. Some of my friends and I were being dumb kids and sword fighting with sticks. I didn't know that Bob was nearby watching us, and during our sword fighting, I swung the stick around behind me trying to be cool. Turns out, I accidentally hit Bob with it and it was his last straw before breaking. He tackled me from behind and started choking me until I lost consciousness. I was told that one of my friends tried to pull him off while others went to grab the teacher but couldn't get him off me even after I was out cold. He was expelled and sent to a juvenile correctional facility for what basically amounted to attempted murder. I have no idea what happened to him since then, but I wonder how his life would have turned out if he'd gotten help instead of shipped off like a criminal, all because I was being dumb and accidentally hit him with a stick. Well, this definitely rates with the title based on the accidental and unfortunate placement of events, but it does sound like something of this nature was going to happen at some point, and at least in this case Bob wasn't alone with someone. Neither you nor Bob died. Sad, but probably for the best his imminent outburst happened in a public place. Only sad that he never got to therapy or something before it happened. I'm sure it's not 100% my fault, but I think I had a hand in ruining my parents' marriage. My brother and I refused to sleep anywhere but our parents' bed. Like for an extremely long time. Years. Eventually, my dad started sleeping in my bed and I slept where he slept, next to my mum. This went on for like 2 years. I know they had other problems, but now that I'm a husband and father, I understand how important intimacy is to a marriage. It really helps keep those lovey-dovey feelings rolling. I can't help but think that if they could have shared a bed, there's a good chance they would have been able to work out their other issues. I think they know that too. And yeah, I also understand that they were the parents and I was the kid and they should have told me to F off and sleep in my own bed. I was in high school when this happened, about 4 years ago. I had this classmate, let's call him Kevin, who was quiet and normally kept to himself. Others sort of found him weird, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary with him from my perspective. One afternoon during one of our classes, I see that there's a USB lying under Kevin's chair. At this point, I didn't know whether it was his or not, but I grabbed it anyway. Impulsively, I told my friend with the laptop to load up the USB and see what was inside. We didn't expect to find a crap ton of pictures of people in furry costumes doing the deed in there. Suddenly, Kevin comes bounding in, grabs the USB, runs back to his chair and buries his head in his arms. Turns out, he had certain interests. After that, he was known around our batch for being the weird guy who's into furry stuff. And he has no idea it was me who found his USB in the first place. Man, high school sucks. The older you get, the less anyone cares what twinks your wink. My friend's life, and subsequently her family's. Our group of friends decided to just go out one night and party like crazy. We were just being dumb and doing stupid teenage stuff. We were all reckless and thought we were invincible. And then she passed away. While I won't go into extreme detail about what happened, I'll say it was alcohol. She had too much in her system and her body just shut down. I don't feel like it was solely my fault, but I do feel like I contributed to ruining her life because I was there and I was being just as irresponsible as everyone around me. I get physically ill when I see posts about her every now and then. It's even worse when I interact with her parents, which isn't often, and I know that it's terrible, but I can't bring myself to face them. I almost hurled when they were tearfully telling my friends and me stories of my friend's childhood and talking about the things they regretted with their parenting, as if them yelling at her over not cleaning her room or stuff like that while she grew up led to her passing away. Her friends were the worst thing to happen to her. Man, this is hard. My ex, just before we broke up, we were talking about smack and why people go to the lengths they do for it, and he said he'd find us some. It was my idea. Then we broke up. After a while, he called me and said he'd found some. Would I like to come over? I declined because I quit and was only a few months clean from substances at that point. He ended up using it and is now a full-blown addict. This makes me incredibly sad. I've turned my life around and he wouldn't have brought the stuff if I'd kept my mouth shut. I heard from a mutual friend a while back. She said he lost all of his teeth and his hair is falling out. He was such a great guy, but that stuff ruined him. What unforgivable thing have you done that you'll never tell anyone about? I grew up very poor with dysfunctional parents in a rural area. My siblings and I often went hungry. As the oldest, I always tried to look after them, but one day I failed hard. When I was 7 and my little brother was 5, I was playing outside and he appeared with a bologna sandwich that he had somehow scraped together from what he could find in the kitchen. It was just a single piece of meat on 2 squished pieces of dried bread. No cheese, no condiments, nothing else. When I saw what he had, in a fit of jealousy, I knocked it out of his little fingers onto the ground. He immediately burst into tears and started bending down to pick it up off the ground. Before he could pick it up out of the dirt, the local pack of stereotypical dogs that a poor rural family keeps pushed him over and ate the sandwich. He just lay there on the ground, covered in dust, crying and repeating over and over, "I made it to share with you." I'm now 30 and we have a close relationship, but not a day goes by that I don't think about what I did on that one day out of petty jealousy. I want to apologize, but I really am hoping that he does not or will not remember it. In short, I destroyed the food of my sibling in a starving situation. Update: I talked to him this weekend while working on our cars. He said he didn't remember it. He made such light of the situation that I couldn't even start to explain how sorry I was about it without seeming overly dramatic. I do feel better though. Thanks everyone for talking me into getting this off my shoulders. My best friend and his father were in an accident 5 years ago. We were both 16. His dad was declared dead at the scene and he ended up in a coma for 12 weeks. I spent a lot of time at the hospital and his house and as a result, with his mum. A couple of weeks after the accident, she just broke down completely as she was driving me home from the hospital. She told me she couldn't be alone that night and begged me to stay with her for a couple of hours. We went back to the house and she poured me a glass of wine. I lost my innocence to her. While my friend's life was hanging in the balance and his dad just buried, I was doing the deed with his mum. I'd always had a thing for her. I mean, she was my friend's hot mum. So I obliged every time she instigated, which was a lot. This stopped immediately after he was released from hospital and we avoid each other now. When we were 10, my best friend and I were always bullied by this kid who lived in our complex. He was one of those sneak bullies too, who acted so lovely around adults, but was a holy terror when they weren't around. So one day, after he held my friend down and made him eat dog poop, we hatched a plan to put him out of commission. We found a Windex bottle and filled it with a bunch of different cleaning agents, one of them being bleach. Then we went looking for him. When we found him, he asked my friend if he was still hungry and wanted some more, and then he came over to us. I squirted him right in the face with the bottle, a few good squeezes worth. He ended up going to the hospital with chemical burns and lost all of the sight in one eye and partial sight in the other. He Facebooked me a few years back and apologized for how he treated us and actually thanked me for what we did to him. He said it was a real eye-opener. His pun, not mine. And he now works exclusively with blind children and says it's incredibly rewarding. Good God! The narrator can tell that this is going to be one of those absolutely harrowing videos to make already, given that the last story is the closest thing we have to wholesome content. Yikes! I'm a big guy, 6'2", 280 pounds, bearded. I was walking through the mall one day and went to hitch up my pants. I chose to do that, however, at the exact time that a small Hispanic woman was walking by with her baby in her arms. I accidentally elbowed that baby right in the face. The woman very timidly said, "Oh, lo siento," and ran off in the opposite direction. I was walking downtown one night after leaving the bar around midnight-ish, and I had to walk a few blocks to my car. Parking is awful in the city on a Friday night. Well, halfway there wasn't anyone around. Someone came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder and told me to give him my wallet or it would be bad, as he had his hand deep in his pocket. I don't really know if he had a piece on him, but all I could think about was getting stabbed or shot, which I really didn't want to go through. So I preempted him, reached for my wallet, and grabbed my knife, put my hand in his face and stabbed him in the stomach 3 times and ran as hard as I could for probably a mile. Never told anyone, never called the cops, as it seemed like that would put me in a worse spot. No idea what happened to him. In short, probably shanked a guy to death. My half-sister, who lived with her father in another state, died of a brain tumor when I was 17 and she was 15. The tumor pressed on her vocal cords, causing her voice to be very high-pitched and breathy. For the last 6 months of her life, I refused to speak with her on the phone because her voice reminded me of her, at the time, untreatable condition and, at the time, inevitable end. This was in 1987 and I still hate myself for it. In short, blew off my dying sister who I loved very much because I was too scared to speak to her. I was 11 years old. I asked my grandma who was raising me to buy me an Oreo McFlurry from Dairy Queen while she was running errands. She didn't want to because it was out of her way. I persisted and she continued to say no. 2 hours later she came back and stopped her car at the end of the driveway and paused for a while, like she was going to back up and do more errands. I came out to see what was up, and she rolled the window down and handed me an Oreo McFlurry with the biggest smile on her face. I took said McFlurry and threw it down on the lawn because I was a hyper prick and was annoyed that she had said no earlier. I remember her smile going to a what the frick face after I threw it. She died of terminal illness a year later. I'm 24 now, and to this day that's my saddest memory ever. She chose to raise me after she had already brought up her own kids and was the best person ever. I'm so sad this is the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about her. P.S. As you can tell, I'm a piece of crap. I miss you, my mum. Sorry. Living abroad in Australia, I did the deed with my German co-worker who had a boyfriend. She was in the country for 3 years on a domestic partnership visa and only had to stay for 6 more months to get full permanent residency. When her boyfriend found out, he broke up with her and alerted immigration, he was her visa sponsor, and she was deported back to Germany. In short, I screwed my co-worker and screwed her by getting her deported. I was walking in a big city in an area unfamiliar to me in an evening this summer, a few hours before sundown. It was in a residential area, about a 20-minute walk from the city centre. There wasn't a whole lot of people on the street and only a little bit of traffic. Now, onto the actual event. As I walk, a car drives by me and turns in on a street I just passed. The car was going faster than was safe, and I heard a young woman screaming something from the half-open passenger door. I think, crazy jerks to myself, and kept walking, as did everyone else who was out. It was only later that night when I thought back on it that I realized something. That woman had screamed, "Help." I was mortified. The fact that neither I nor anyone else on the street did a single thing to help her made me feel ill. As far as I know, no one checked up on the situation. No one called the cops, no one did anything. The worst thing is, I have no idea what happened to the girl. She could have been a victim of a kidnapping for all I know. Frick. I was climbing a tree with my friend when we were in 1st grade. I was the better tree climber as he was sort of an inside all the time kind of kid. For some reason, I thought it would be awesome to pee from the top of the tree. While peeing, I thought it would be awesome to pee on him. So I did. At laser tag, I accidentally knocked down a little girl when we collided while rounding a corner.
Instead of helping her up, I shot her for the points and ran away. I mean, I think up until the age of 25, I would have been right there with you. Little kids are bouncy, they were probably fine. I mean, yeah, you were terrible, and yeah, I'm laughing. This is something right off a script page of Always Sunny in Philadelphia. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Just a few months ago, I went on a road trip with the wife and kids. On the way back, my son made us take an emergency potty break. When I got out to get him out of the car, I found a wallet on the ground. I picked it up, got in the car, and opened it up. It had several credit cards, SS card, bank card, DL, $879 in cash, and several other items. I looked the guy up on Facebook and sent him a friend request with a message saying I found his wallet. Fast forward about 2 weeks, don't hear from him, contact his relatives, they have him call me. The guy wants me to bring it to him, a 1.5 hour ride away. I tell him it's not possible, I'm too busy. He says, that's effed up, bro. I say, sorry, but I can meet you halfway this weekend. Guy says, cool. He then tells me he doesn't remember how or when he lost it because he was fricking hammered. Fast forward to the weekend, I arrive at the location he's decided on and I wait for him for over 30 minutes. He finally calls and says, my bad bro, I was at the bar with my friends and forgot about you. I'll be there in about 10 minutes. 45 minutes later, he shows up, walks up to me and says, 1 second bro, I've got to take a leak. He's obviously intoxicated, makes me wait while he goes in to pee. For some reason, my inner voice said, frick this guy. So I took the money out of the wallet. Just seconds later, he walks up and I hand him his wallet. He says, thanks, snatches it from my hand and leaves. I don't feel bad at all about this. Not one bit. In short, found a guy's wallet, he was a jerk, I took his $879. I feel good about it. Who the frick carries around almost $1,000 in cash, and then doesn't even check to see if it's still there? I wouldn't kill the person I loved. She was a day from the end of her life. A virus had eaten her liver, and she went yellow. Her liver couldn't filter out water anymore, so her lower half was swelling up. This meant she couldn't move her legs, and she used to be a ballet dancer. She had a Hickman line, which is a tube that connects to an artery in the chest. It's used for putting chemotherapy into the bloodstream. She decided to cut through the tube so that she would bleed to death. She did that, looked at me, and said, why isn't it working? It failed because of blood pressure. If she was lying down, it would have worked. I closed up the end of the tube. I knew she was dying. I knew she was going to suffer another day, but I wouldn't let her die. I even thought to myself, you'd be better off dead, and I was too selfish to let her go. She was always brave, and she chose to die on her own terms. But I'm a coward, and I made her suffer because I'm weak. This was about 20 years ago, so it's been a while. I grew up in New York. The school I went to had about 3 white kids, 2 Hispanic, and 2,300 or so black students. I was one of the white kids. I was a typical inner-city child, listened to punk, skateboarded, and all that. I got jumped a lot. To the point where I eventually left school, but this story is one of the reasons I left. So there were twins at this school, let's call them John and Shantae. They always picked on me. I guess I had a mohawk and liked the dead Kennedys enough to lump me with the skinheads. So all of the white kids at school were labeled as skinheads, even though none of us were. I was standing in front of my locker getting books, and both of them snuck up behind me. I felt a really hard slap on the side of my head where it was shaved, and the pain was actually pretty intense. I turned around to fight whoever just hit me, only to see these two and about 15 other kids. The principal was standing on the other side of these kids with a smirk on his face. I could do nothing except mutter, "You'll get yours, alone." It was later on that day when I got my chance. I saw John walking toward the stairs. It was a 3-story school and we were on the top floor. I lost all self-control as the anger hit me and I ran at him full speed. I actually jumped and hit him with both feet in his back, and the back of his head right as he hit the top of his stairs to go down. He flew the entire 15 stairs or so and hit his head on the wall. He was completely knocked out. I could faintly hear the screams as I flew down the stairs to him. People were telling me to stop, even though I spent many years getting my butt handed to me by these guys and never being able to fight them one-on-one. This was my chance. I hit the landing where his body was lying and I jumped in the air and landed both feet on his head. The sound is something I'll never forget. From what I understand, he had surgery from that. I ended up in a boys' home as well because of it. But to this day, I feel incredibly crappy that I did this to him.
It just goes to show what can happen if you spend so long taking crap from people and not having adults who are willing to intervene. Before you say I'm absolutely terrible for this happened 2 years earlier. I'd been skating home with some friends, we were on the road, and who walks out of a store but the twins? They see me and my friends, and the first thing John, the one I drop-kicked, does is throw a full Snapple bottle at me. It hit me right in the nose and shattered the bridge of it. They actually ran while my friends scrambled to chase them down and see if I was alright at the same time. My childhood was a mess. Cue all of us who were ever bullied rating the severity of our treatment against this guy. He had it worse than I think I ever did. I think the absolute worst part is the school principal actively smiling at the ongoing treatment of one of his students. What a worthless educator. Hopefully the author and John both recovered and went on to be better people. I don't know what else you can say about that. While my uncle was dying in a hospice unit, I was cranking it next to him. It was my turn to stay for the night, I was bored, and I had a laptop with a decent Wi-Fi connection. And one thing led to another. After I cleaned up, I noticed the room was really quiet and checked his pulse and called the nurse to tell him he had finally passed away. I still feel terrible. Oh god, that poor uncle. And as I ascended into the clouds, I looked back on my earthly body, and there was my nephew pumping his hog. I banged my ex-girlfriend of 3 years for around 6 months while she was engaged. We'd been broken up for about 3 years at this point too. She, quote, needed to make sure she didn't love me anymore. And my wang was in control. 5 out of 10 wouldn't engage in adultery again. I was at Dave & Buster's heading back to my friends with a huge mug of beer in my hands. An oblivious little girl runs right towards me, her head equally level to my mug. I barely avoid spilling a good splash of beer in the process. I yell, "Hey!" and turn around to further chastise the little girl. She looks back at me and trips, falling. Then, wham! The little girl that was chasing the first girl runs smack into my mug. The whole thing empties onto her head. 2 little girls are on the floor crying hysterically, one drenched in beer. Their parents were there in a flash, and the first thing that came out of my mouth is, "You guys owe me a new beer." Frick places that mix a bar scene with Chuck E. Cheese. When I was 6 years old, my buddy and I decided to put a boulder on a seesaw and see if we could make it catapult. We were 6 years old, darn it. I was a weak kid and couldn't get a proper grip on it. I accidentally dropped it and my friend's hands got caught underneath the boulder on cement ground. He started screaming and I got scared, so I just ran away. He stayed like that for a few hours. Okay, here we go. This still torments me to this day. When I was 13 years old, my parents took me to buy a hunting slingshot. I also bought a bunch of large metal ball bearings to shoot. My parents kept the real ammo and told me I wasn't allowed to play with the slingshot when they weren't home. So 15 minutes after we got home, they both left for a few hours. My brother and his friend and I immediately went and took the slingshot out of their room, but couldn't find the ammo. Our house was built on an old hazelnut farm, so there were hazelnut trees around the entire property and a lot of squirrels. We started picking up the nuts that the squirrels dropped out of the trees and started shooting things in the yard. Then, sure enough, this squirrel came down on a really low branch while my brother's friend had a nut ready to shoot. We hadn't been able to hit a single target the entire time we were outside. We sucked! So as a joke, I told my brother's friend to shoot at the squirrel that was 10 feet away. He pulled back and shot the squirrel right in the side of the head. It fell out of the tree and was paralyzed on the left side of its body, but it was kicking with the 2 feet on the right side and was spinning in a circle, making these horrible shrieking noises. There were blood bubbles exploding out of its nose, mouth, and eyeball at the same time. It was screaming this shrill, bloody murder noise, and it was my fault that it was writhing in horrendous pain. I swear to God I could feel the pain it was experiencing. I thought quick and realized I had to put it out of its misery, so I grabbed a big branch off the ground and started hitting the squirrel as hard as I possibly could. It wouldn't die. I was smashing the crap out of that little critter, and it took at least 8 to 10 hits to finally kill it. Once it was dead, I dug a hole and buried the little guy and apologized to it over and over, petting it and telling it I was so sorry. I'm 31 years old now, and after almost 20 years, I still get sick to my stomach every time I think about it. Frick, I suck. A number of years ago, I was addicted to white snow. Part of that addiction was selling it in order to support my own habit, which in itself was a pretty bad thing. However, I took it way further than that one weekend. I'd just brought a large amount with the intentions of getting a hotel room at the local Six and hustling out there for the weekend. On the way there, I had a friend in the car with me and he recognized a girl walking and wanted to stop and say hi to her. I pulled over and they chatted a bit and he asked what she was doing. She told him she was on her way to a local area that was known for smack. I kind of laughed to myself because I knew I had the best white snow in the area. She asked what all that was about, so I asked her if she knew how to cook her own. She did, so I told her to hop in, no need for her to get ripped by a smack dealer, I had the best stuff in town. She jumped and we went on our way. My friend had already told me she was a smack working girl, and this got my white snow-fueled insane brain chugging along. When we got to the room, I sold her $10 worth, and she cooked it up and took the very first hit as soon as she could. I swear her eyes got as big as saucers, and she asked if I had enough to keep her going all weekend. I told her as long as she had the money, I could do it. I spent the next 2 days straight watching her buy a small amount, cook it up, smoke it up, leave and do her business, come back and buy a small amount, cook it up, and so on and so forth. I think I made about $2.5 grand off her that weekend while she sold herself out to anyone with $10 or more. I didn't do it because I needed to. I could have sold a larger amount to a few of my regular people and accomplished what I needed to do in order to get high all weekend for free. I just did it because I'd never done anything like that before and I wanted to know what it felt like. While it was happening, I was staying high, snorting. It was a pretty amazing feeling. Looking back on it now, I'm disgusted with myself. In short, rented out a smack working girl for a weekend because I could. I did the deed with a girl while her boyfriend was away at his father's funeral. To be fair, to me of course, she told me they'd broken up and I didn't know anything about the funeral, but I still felt terrible after I found out. Turns out the guy inherited 7 figures though, which he told the girl while dumping her. Dude hated me hard for years, understandably. When did you realize? I'm in a cult! I dated a girl in high school who was a total freak in the bedroom, so when she pressured me into going to church with her, it was hard to say no. First red flag was when they called me Brother Braniel as an introduction. Second red flag was when everyone started yelling gibberish and jumping around. Third red flag was when they brought out the snakes. I actually got some pretty harsh looks because I didn't start talking gibberish and jumping around. It was definitely a case of, "You're here, this is what you do," peer pressure. So that's how I visited a snake-handling Holiness, Alabama backwater church. My college friend invited me to a service at her new church. Later told me that the, quote, church met in a barn and they spent their last service literally vomiting up their demons. 50 or so people just wholly vomiting all at once. I went to my 20th reunion 5 years ago, and the woman who organized it I've known since 3rd grade. Very nice, smart, charismatic, the whole package, and she told me about her self-help and life coaching company. I said that sounds cool and maybe I could benefit. So she said she would hook it up later. I live in LA and when I got back I had an email introducing me to her colleague whose email domain was esplosangeles.com, which sounded weird. A quick trip to their webpage and a Google search and I found out she was trying to get me to join NXIVM, which is now all over the news. Google NXIVM, all caps by the way, and steel yourself. I noped right out of there and I'm glad I did as a bunch of them are going to jail now. The therapeutic boarding school Elan. The first night I got there, everyone told me how I'd get used to everything. And I did, I fell into their trap. I didn't realize how messed up it was until the school got shut down by the FBI and the owner got charged with child endangerment and inappropriate behavior with a student. I got invited to a business meeting for a life insurance company. My wife was looking for business connections and trying to get referrals to her company, so we went along. It was a multi-level marketing life insurance company. It was such a creepy, culty place. Everyone with fake serial killer smiles, constantly talking about how much money they're making. The worst part was the other guests around us were nodding their heads in agreement, taking in the bullcrap hook, line, and sinker. My wife and I just looked at each other, left, and stopped answering that guy's phone calls. We had actually signed up for some insurance through them when we thought it was a normal company. We immediately cancelled and signed up with a real big-name insurance company. The narrator was honestly making bets with himself on when the first multi-level marketing scheme would appear. And in case you're questioning whether they really count, perhaps not religiously,
but look at how they acquire and keep their members, and then Google how modern cults do it. The methods are remarkably similar. And just like cults, they tend to destroy regular people's lives. Actually, there was a great discussion about such organizations shortly after. Here it is. My now ex-boyfriend said he signed up for a professional and personal development course. I realized it was a cult when he came back with no personality and a whole new set of esoteric jargon. And any questions I had about it were rebuffed. What, you think it's a cult or something? I mean, you know Apple is considered a cult too, right? I find it interesting that most newer cults aren't really religious. The old doomsday, God's gonna get you things are a lot rarer. Now it's just a bunch of self-help crap that doesn't even pretend to be about anything other than success. I can't tell if this is worse or better. Which makes lots of money. I think cults today are more about making lots of money off desperate people than they are about gods or the alien spaceship coming. My school's National Honor Society induction involved all of the inductees crowding in a dark room and chanting the National Honor Society pledge while holding candles. I was at a cafe one time and a guy was giving a multi-level marketing pitch to this girl who was buying it hook, line, and sinker. I listened to his pitch for about 1.5 hours. I was working on a paper and he was talking so loudly, and it took that long to figure out what they were selling. It was insurance. He'd already talked about how uplines work, the money structure, promise of making 6 figures a year, and he hadn't even mentioned exactly what they were selling. I work for an insurance company and I was waiting for a moment for him to get up to go to the bathroom or something, so I could warn her that this was an MLM cult and no reputable insurance company runs this way. But after 3 hours I got tired of waiting and left. Best of luck with your new lifestyle, lady. I went to a small women's college in Virginia. I only stayed a semester because of the group mentality. They would have constant rituals that were not technically mandatory, but you were weird if you didn't go. One alone wasn't weird, but collectively it was too much. For example, one Founders Day, everyone wore white. We went to the chapel for the ceremony and then walked 2 miles to the graveyard where the founders were buried. We all had to lay roses on the graves and sing the school's song. 4 girls in my class tried to self-delete in the first semester, and my class only had 64 girls. If you discussed transferring, then the dean of the students and the school's counselor would threaten to have you put in a mental hospital for 72 hours. I transferred in secret so no one would find out. I didn't even tell my friends. I'd wake up at 4 a.m. and transfer stuff from my dorm room to be shipped home. In short, went to a women's college, and if you didn't conform, the dean of the students would threaten to put you in a mental institution. I was looking into franchise businesses a while back, and one place offered me the chance to buy in and become a business coach. They had me take aptitude tests, went over my work history, and said that I'd be perfect with my business background. I went to meet them with a group of other potential franchisees at a presentation in a hotel, common for all franchise businesses, and I was like, what the frick? This is a multi-level marketing scheme. The other people there had next to no business experience, and all they were telling us was that we had to find our clients to coach and then read them a script off an iPad app. What's scary is that they're an actual registered franchise business. I'm not going to say that the script they had didn't have useful things that actually could have helped a small business, mainly because I would have to pony up around $100,000 just to see it. Every other franchise I spoke to and turned down, like a food or educational chain, were extremely polite and said, "Best of luck to you." These guys just cut off all contact with me, and I heard later through my franchise broker they were angry. When my Latin club sacrificed a stuffed animal before finals to pray to the gods for good grades. "But sir, the oracle at Delphi clearly predicted that I would score an 87%. You are either mistaken in your grading or intentionally undermining the sacred rights of the gods at Delphi." Had a pretty crappy sales position selling TV and internet in retail stores. It was impulse sales, meaning you're trying to get people to sign up for 2 years of something they just learned about 5 minutes ago. Anyways, there was a ton of rejection, but it was a full commission gig, so you stayed in the field until you closed. Therefore, it required a crap ton of effort and seemingly unending optimism and confidence. Anyways, every morning you'd get fired up with cheers and chants and other activities that involved yelling and team building. This also resulted in there being 10,000 sayings recycled on the daily about sticking through it and taking control of your destiny. Anyway, You buy into the system and the energy, and that's how they get you. One night I was driving home a coworker, and you pay for your own gas, another sweet perk, and he found an article, Why the Company is Like a Cult. And though he was laughing on the outside, this guy 100% brought it up to be like, this stuff is crazy, right? Needless to say, the article was spot on and he didn't last much longer, and I quit soon after that. After reading that, the narrator is realizing that a door-to-door salesman job he worked just after he finished high school was, if not an actual cult, then kind of cult-adjacent. Right down to the chants we did to get hyped. Luckily, I was so bad at it that I had to leave and go back on unemployment for a bit longer until I found my first actual job in a cafe. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. When I was in middle school, a Jehovah's Witness family showed up and enrolled their kids in public school. One of them, a fairly attractive boy, started flirting with me. I'd always been that weird girl in school, so I obviously fell for him. He told me he wasn't allowed to date per se, but he was allowed to invite people to his church, and if I went with him, we could hang out and it would be just like a date. So I went with him, and that day we were talking about how if you join the church, you cannot speak with apostates or any of your family who aren't witnesses. I knew enough about cults for that to be a big red flag. I was still interested in him though. When he asked me to go again, I politely declined because churchy stuff had never been my speed. Instead, I suggested we sneak out one night and meet. He did, and I used my allowance to get us tickets to some movie. I didn't see him for years after that. His family just vanished. The next time I saw him, it was in a mall. I went up and said hi, only for his grandmother to yank him away, snarling not to speak with, "That filthy hussy." I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist, but I think he was only allowed to flirt with me because they were trying to convert me and my family. In my community, we were pretty well known. My father was the fire chief, and in a small town like this, that's a big deal. I still wonder what happened to that guy though. I once went to my friend's Scentsy party. It was so uncomfortable. I hate scented candles and all that crap. I get headaches from a lot of fragrances and I have a terrible sense of smell, so I'm really not the target market for Scentsy. Every woman at the party would ooh and ah at each scent. I was pretty indifferent to all of them and I really didn't want to spend $50 on a candle. But there was so much pressure that I just brought a wax warmer and got the heck out. Never again. I realized I was in a cult after I entered the Oculus Quest subreddit. I was having a crisis of faith in college, and my friend invited me to a megachurch her family sometimes visited. She was singing its praises, talking about how supportive, friendly, and progressive it was. She swore this place would speak to me. One of the issues I had with religion was how old-fashioned it was, how things didn't change with the times, so progressive sounded great. We got there for the 11 a.m. service. There were like 5 services throughout the day to accommodate their massive congregation. And my friend took me through the door for new worshippers and visitors. I was already kind of put off by this. I didn't want to go through the visitors' door because I don't like having special attention drawn to me in a new place. I tried to get my friend to let me go through the regular door, since I just wanted to check the place out and no reason to make a big deal out of it. But she insisted this was how things were done and I had to go. At this point, I'm about to balk. Why is there a separate entrance? Why can't I use the normal door? Are they going to baptize me before they let me in? Because I've been there, done that, and it didn't seem to take. I finally let her drag me in there. She was my ride after all. Inside, there were several staff members, all smiling way too large smiles in the welcoming area, waiting on us newbies. We went up to one lady who gave me a super chipper rendition of the welcome speech that was echoing almost verbatim around us to other newcomers. All are welcome. We don't judge. All faiths, creeds, backgrounds are encouraged. She gave me a free t-shirt, super comfy if I'm being honest, and then a coupon for a free smoothie from the cafe in the church right outside the sanctuary. Now, I grew up Southern Baptist, and the concept of having to pay for something in a church, besides what was in the offering plate, was completely foreign and just this side of blasphemous. I asked my friend what was in the smoothies because I felt it was a more modern way to drink the Kool-Aid, and she wasn't amused by that. But still, free is free, so I took it. We went in and the music was something. They took popular songs from the time but changed the lyrics to fit the religious theme. After, they had a bunch of people come out and start telling us how the church helped fix their awful paths of sin. They were alleged substance addicts who lost everything to their substances, but it turned around at the church. There were people talking about how giving to the church helped them out of their financial struggles. I mean, excuse me? The minister came out and told us if we were having a rough time mentally, physically, financially, or personally, that giving money to the church would make it better. If it didn't work at first, try giving more. You try giving 10% but no results, God just wants you to give more to spread the word. Try giving 20%. The guy made it clear that giving your time to the church was not as valuable as giving money. He talked about giving massive donations that no normal person could ever afford without losing everything. One guy said that doing this cured him of his gambling. I mean, yeah, because you don't have anything left to gamble. Not really a cure, just an alternative displacement of funds. By the time we left, I felt worse about religion than before. I told my friend that the place felt more like a cult or a really smiley mafia. Wouldn't have surprised me if people telling their stories on stage were just trying to work off a debt to the minister. My friend disagreed and just said that I was jaded. It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to pass into heaven. That's a very easy saying to understand. It's absolutely insane the mental and ideological backflips that some of these megachurch owners will go through to explain away that saying, and justify the obscene amounts of money that they exploit from their congregation. I don't know whether they believe what they're saying or not, but they're just so blatantly rich and taking people's money away from them that I don't understand how they or the people they take from can justify it. I joined a mum group when I was having my first child. It was a crunchy mum group. For those who don't know, a crunchy mum is kind of like a hipster mum, and the mum groups can get pretty cult-like. I joined the group because of shared ideas. Bed sharing, extended breastfeeding, cloth diapering, and stuff like that. Well, I gave up on cloth diapering and those mums went nuts. They staged an intervention with me and pretty much wouldn't let me leave until I put my kid in a cloth. And that's only some of the things. My parents were part of AmITheA. It's a pyramid scheme, of course, but it's also extremely religious. I'd even classify it as its own denomination of Christianity. They used to have to do meetings, in which they tried to rope friends and family and total strangers they met at work into doing AmITheA too, which began and ended with a prayer even if the people weren't religious or Christian. They'd literally pray for money and wealth. AmITheA worked like a private country within America. It even had its own movies, music, and celebrities. You don't see all of that from the outside. It's not until you're deep into it that you realize how hard they pound this stuff into people. It's a miracle my parents decided to give it up. Going to my first high school football game in South Texas. Real cult vibes. Isagenix and basically the one weekend of seminars that my significant other and I had the chance to go to since it was hosted in Seattle. Yeah. Isagenix comes off as a little cultish. I went to high school orientation with my son. There was a presentation phase where electives and clubs got to talk and tell everyone what they were about. A group of really excited kids got up on stage and started talking about all the great places their club goes and to all of the competitions, without ever saying anything about what they actually do. Before they got done talking, my son watches me pull my phone out and search, "Is DECA a cult?" When typing "is DECA," the occult part was top recommended additional search. I don't think my son is going to join. I've been involved in a number of cults, both as a leader and a follower. You have more fun as a follower, but you make more money as a leader. I was part of a Second Life roleplay sim years ago that was really dark and toxic even though people swore it wasn't, and people kept going back even though they'd leave even more battered than they already were. Everyone was convinced that it had been a wonderful place and that if they just tried a little bit harder, they could make it great again. No one ever succeeded, of course, and after going back and leaving a few times myself, I finally left for good. But something always bothered me that I could never explain. Why did everyone there feel like the city was theirs? Like they somehow owned a stake in the city, like somehow the city had become a part of their very soul, even though it was just a stupid RP sim. Years later, I was researching abuse psychology and found a list of cult traits. I was able to check off just about every single box. Gosh darn place was run like a cult. Turns out most Second Life roleplay sims are. Screw that stuff. When the people who I thought were my friends turned on me, resorting to threats of violence and the unspeakable act and even death because I disagreed with them. The Penn State scandal with Jerry Sandusky. Screw your little kids, we want another national championship, please. Plus the overinflated egos of most Penn Staters. We get it, you go to Penn State and crap on everyone else with no real reason to do so. I've got some friends that go there that aren't like this, but gosh darn, your IQ isn't that much higher than mine, if it is at all. Penn State isn't MIT on an academic scale, nor is it Alabama on a football scale. That place is a cult. Oh boy, I'll try and keep this brief. So I applied to this sales job. Got asked in for an interview the next day. I go there, and it's cool, but it seems like they're just telling me how great their business is rather than actually interviewing me. Second group interview arranged. I meet a cute girl. Vibes. The team leader interviewing us buys us coffee and generally seems way too bubbly. Suspicion kicks in. I get told we start Monday. Over the weekend, I matched the cute girl on Tinder. This is kind of a side story, but we started dating over the next few weeks. I got into work on Monday. Morning meeting is basically a fricking circle where the boss man's right-hand man preaches about motivation or ambitions or some crap and waves about how dope Elon Musk's life or Bill Gates or something are, and they all did it by being self-employed. There's like a routine that all the others have learned where they chant certain things whenever the front guy says anything in specific. We role-play training pitches before going out, loud, bumpy music to enforce the good vibes. I already know I'm being played, but I really need the money at the time, so I just roll with it and half-heartedly go into the whole, yep, I'm gonna have this jerky, over-enthusiastic energy if it helps me get sales and stay here until I find something better mentality. Before I even start working, they had literally explained quite honestly how the entire business works with a trickle-down commission system, but it was pretty clear that the way it really works was the following. Someone starts here, then realizes they're earning nothing. Then hears all the stories about how successful people have been, realizes they need to take new recruits below them to scrape off their earnings, takes new recruits, then realizes they have to pander to and over-exaggerate how the person below them is going to become rich too, otherwise they'll just quit, and practically get mind-controlled and mind-control others. Hope the person below them gets more people even further below them, and the whole business is about being a deceptive sociopath and deceiving people until you've suckered them enough to train them to also be deceptive sociopaths. As far as I can tell, the management lied about how many sales people got on average to make it look like others were earning more. The business literally had a whole other business above it that was taking a cut of their earnings, and several businesses under it when team leaders' teams got too big. If you're interested in it, you can read about the kind of business at the Devil Corp WordPress. The manager that I worked for is literally pictured on that site with devil horns. I found that site about 2 weeks after I started, and it basically confirmed everything I already knew. It's practically a business and cult that makes its money by what is basically psychology engineering. I told the girl I was dating, who started at the same time as me, everything I knew, and she thought I was a conspiracy nutjob, called me delusional and several other harsh things, and sold me out to the boss. I got called into the office and the manager showed me the texts I sent her. Last I heard, from one good lad who somewhat believed what I had to say, everyone had been talking crap about me behind my back because that's exactly what they want. They want any defectors to become a laughingstock. It's been about a year, but in the UK, these businesses are spreading like wildfire because they're literally designed to just expand and reincorporate into new child companies in different locations. I see people cold approaching other people on the street or at the edge of stores with badges. I normally try to talk to them, confirm what company they're with and who they're affiliated with, and they normally lead back to the same few businesses. I tell them to check out the link I just mentioned and hope that they aren't too brainwashed and that they look into what they're doing. It needs media exposure because really I see more of these people and more of these job postings on boards every month. What was the craziest thing you saw someone do with a company credit card? Buy approximately $65 of gas 4 times in 1 hour. He only had 1 company car but 3 personal cars at home. After an audit, he had been getting away with it for over a year. Had a friend who managed to spend $20,000 on her corporate card over the course of about a year and a half. Apparently, she felt like she wasn't being compensated or treated well at her job, even though she actually was, and would go out and buy things on the card. Dinner, gas, books, makeup, and clothes, among other things. After the fact, she told me that in the beginning she'd been careful to buy things only at places she knew her boss and his partner would shop at, because they were the only other two people who had cards on the account. Then later she tossed all reason aside and would basically hijack the credit card bill every month and cut it up and reprint it without her purchases on there, like her boss or his accountant would never notice the discrepancy in dollar amounts. One day her boss called her into his office and she thought she was going to get a raise. Nope. Credit card statements all over the place. The ultimatum was pay the money back within the week or be charged. She had to beg a relative for the money. The dumbest part was, even after all of that, she still didn't think she was the bad person in the situation. We stopped being friends shortly after that. A co-worker was dating someone that also worked for the company. He used his company card to buy an addition to the girlfriend's house. Something like a $20,000 addition. The accountants caught it and started digging around to figure out why we had bought so much wood, drywall, and other building materials. Finally, someone got the idea to start driving around and looking at the employees' homes, and found the huge addition on the girlfriend's house. They were both fired for theft. The best part was it wasn't even her house, it was a rental. Once she lost her job, she couldn't afford the rent anymore and got evicted. I'm sure that the landlord was laughing his butt off at the whole thing and got a nice free addition to the house. Well, I guess the same kind of person who tries to add a massive section to a rental would be the same kind of person to spend $20,000 on renovations on a company credit card. I've never had one of those, just things like per diem with my jobs, but to be honest, it sounds like way more trouble than it's worth. No thanks. I was bartending one night. It was a Thursday, so karaoke was going on. A guy walked in a business suit and walked up to the bar and said, "As long as I'm here, everything is on this card." I said, "Sure enough, what would you like to drink?" And he said, "When I say everything, I mean every drink, shot, and food for every person." He stayed until closed and tallied up a huge bar tab, tipped 50%. I came to find out he had been let go, but the company forgot to take his credit card. I don't know whatever happened legally, but I made close to $1,000 in tips that night. Back when I was in high school, I took a cooking class. This is in a small town where the grocery store is only a stone's throw away from the high school, and cooking students are often sent to the store to pick up ingredients. When a student would do this, they'd get a little card, which they used to pay, and they'd have to sign a little form at the till. I did this several times. So this one day, the teacher asks one kid to go to the store to get oats. He comes back with a bag completely full, and when he's asked how much he spent on oats, he responds, "About $200, as if that was a completely normal amount of money to spend on oats. I wish I was kidding. I remember reading what someone did to get fired on their first day. He went out on the corporate card and brought like 6 suits on his corporate credit card on his lunch break. I worked at an exotic dance club back in the 90s, and a customer ran up a $3,500 tab on his corporate Amex and left without closing it out. A few days later, we got a visit from the police as he reported the card stolen. Thing is, he was a regular and we had plenty of video footage of him getting lap dances while wearing his corporate-issued polo shirt. He not only got fired but was charged with filing a false police report, which led to his wife divorcing him for being such a pole dancer-loving idiot. A guy bought a diamond ring for his wife. When it was brought up to him, he said he was going to pay it off, except he never mentioned it to anyone until he was caught. Instead of firing him, they took it out of his next 6 or more paychecks. Nice interest-free loan for him, I guess. I used to audit corporate card purchases for a Fortune 50 company. I caught a guy trying to buy a $30K boat from Base Pro and a $15K walk-in humidor. We had a co-worker, may he rest in peace. He spent £13,000 in the adult dance club with the company card. He would have spent more if the card hadn't blocked it. He self-deleted the next day. I think it was a big FU to the company. I don't know that this was dumb since it was technically legit, but it's still shocking to me. I was at a conference with the big partners from my firm and got invited out to dinner with them and a prospective client. There were about 8 of us in total at a nice steakhouse, and I'm a wine fan, and they had a nice list. Partner indicated that my counterpart with the client also liked wine and that we should order a few bottles. Partners and CEO were drinking scotch. When we got the tab, it was $17,000. I was, of course, the only one surprised by this. It was worth it, too, since we probably billed the client within the first week, but damn. I once ran an audit for a company.
who through my audit found out that an employee was using her manager's credit card to foot her personal purchases. Stuff on the receipts included massive orders for protein bars, endless entries to PayPal, and even tickets for two to an NFL game. Thousands of dollars, and apparently no regret was shown as she was getting canned. So stupid. A guy I know took his family on a ski trip to Aspen, every year for 8 years. A few years back, it came to light that my mother, the head accountant at a mid-sized company, had been using company cards and creative accounting for nearly a decade to the tune of at least $100K. They stopped investigating when they hit that number because it was enough to pass the threshold for the maximum felony penalty, which is 25 years. We became aware of her crimes when she went missing and ended up attempting self-deletion the night before her arraignment. Her attempt was unsuccessful, but she finally went through with it a little more than a year later, on the night before she was set to begin serving her sentence. The whole thing has upended my life. At my company, we once ran an audit, probably coming from the board. It turns out our CISO was charging over $30,000 a month on her card by breaking pretty much every corporate expense policy there was. All flights were first class, hired personal drivers everywhere she went instead of taking a taxi, $200 or more dinners at high-end restaurants almost every night, suites at the nicest hotels and resorts in the area, and $300 or more on spa visits at any hotel that had one, among other things. She was promptly asked to step down. Also had a senior manager who knew he was getting fired, and he went out and bought all of his employees everything that he could, just barely within the policy, so the company would have trouble coming after him for the money. New laptops, additional monitors, company cell phones, briefcase bags, and approved any and all training they wanted to take, even if it required unnecessary travel. I think he racked up almost $40K in his last week with the company. I had an employee buy a used car with his. I had another employee pay a court-ordered penalty with it, and had one more draw down cash to buy substances with it. Alcohol, working girls. 20 years in people management, I've seen it all. My first day on the job, a Starbucks employee charged my corporate Amex card $4.5 for a latte instead of $4.50. Oh well, Starbucks is famously overpriced, but yes, on second thought, that does look a tad pricey even for them. Coupled with a 15% tip, I hope you had fun explaining it to your boss. Rest in peace, expensive coffee consumer. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Guy was overseas on a business trip in Eastern Europe and in an establishment he shouldn't have been in. Decided to buy a round of drinks, figuring no one would know from the name of the place what it was. Unfortunately, later he was enjoying the pleasures of a lady that worked in the establishment and having run out of cash, forgotten he had used his work card to buy the drinks when agreeing to specific services being offered by the employee, and was then surprised to be questioned by the FD a month later on why a restaurant he brought drinks in was also charging him a €50 supplement for doing it in the butt. Worked at a retail company that gave all of its store managers corporate cards. The cards had high limits on them, so the store managers could use that instead of maintaining petty cash on hand or having to use personal cards while traveling for training. While visiting one of the stores, I asked where their Keurig machine was. I wanted a coffee, and the closest Starbucks was a few blocks away. I'd seen the manager's expense report with a purchase for a Keurig machine, K-cups, a small bathroom fixture, and a few other things. The assistant manager says, "We don't have a Keurig machine." After looking into it further, it turns out the manager had been using the card to buy several personal items over the last few years. Ended up repaying a little over $20,000 in purchases. When working away, while not officially authorized but never queried, it was generally accepted the manager there would take the workers out for a couple of drinks at the end of whatever we were doing. Not a crazy night out or anything, but a round or two at the nearest bar to where we were staying. The manager had been out most of the day with another boss drinking when we finished work late in the afternoon, and we went to the bar to have a few beers and something to eat at the hotel we were staying at. "It's okay, I'll get this one." And about 5 rounds later, we were all like, are you sure this is fine?" "Yeah, it's okay." I'm a decent drinker, but even I was off my butt at the end of the night. I woke up at around 10 a.m. to go down for food. Apparently, the majority of the booze drunk that night went on the card. We officially didn't get in trouble, but now you can only use the company card for sanctioned work events.
Not quite a corporate credit card, but in the same vein. Many years ago, when I was in college, our student government had a retreat near the start of the year. The college agreed to reimburse for food, so they submitted their receipts, including their liquor store receipt. Not only will the college not pay for alcohol, drinking was forbidden at school-sponsored events. Apparently, this fact was made abundantly clear to the student government. The entire government had to resign and new elections were held. My roommate went to a networking thing out of state paid for by the company. All the salesmen had corporate cards for taking out clients and such. The second night there, they all headed to the exotic dance club. One of the new guys charged about $500 on his card at the club. He reported it stolen after the trip, and as far as I've heard, nothing came from it. Dude tried to pass off a $350 spa package as a gift for a client. Problem is, we have no clients based near us, the closest being some 2,000 miles away. My boss wasted $127 on iTunes to download some music. A guy lived across the country and commuted at the beginning and end of every week. For the first few months, any of his flights or lodging expenses could be covered by the company per his contract. After that time expired, he was expected to have either moved here permanently or start covering his own transportation and hotels if he chose to keep commuting every week. He simply never stopped charging his company card for it. He tried to get clever with it too. He'd route his flights through other cities and pretend he was conducting business there, so they were technically supposed to be covered by the company, and would lose hotel receipts thinking it would be impossible to prove that the hotels he was staying in were local to us. After nearly a year of catching these things and having to make him write the company a personal check every month, they finally fired him. When the army first went to a travel card system, they initially used Amex. The card had no limit and were activated at all times. One of my soldiers went out and brought a set of rims for his personal vehicle to the tune of $2,500. Now there are limits and the cards are deactivated until needed. Invited their landlord out to a night on the town in lieu of rent payment, and told the company it was for a sales lead, so they charged the dinner and drinks to the company card. Basically, free rent. Purchased lavish dinners at a local surf and turf, copious amounts of liquor included, for himself and his mistress. They were both married and his wife actually had a chronic illness. He then claimed that the expenses were staff appreciation events. What actually got him fired was when the auditors came and asked employees, "What did you do at the staff appreciation event on X date?" And we were all like, "What staff appreciation event?" Honestly, at the time it was hilarious that this was what resulted in his firing, since he was doing so much else that was much worse. He hired his mistress, slept with her at work, and fired everyone who caught them at it. She hired another relative for basically a janitorial role and paid him $30 an hour, when the going rate for those kinds of positions are generally $10 an hour. He cut salaries without cause and claimed it was because they'd maxed out, never attended meetings, he stopped paying company bills, Large Corp had us on must prepay cash only, which is unheard of in our industry, and he did many other things like this. But the use of the corporate card was what he finally got canned for, since it was the easiest for them to prove. This guy sounds like the complete package of what you picture when someone tells you to think of a corrupt corporate boss. That complacence at restructuring the entire workplace just to enable his filthy habits is just so damn typical. He definitely deserved the firing. During the 2008 recession, the president of the company took a pay cut, so he just started putting everything on his company card. All the gas for his family's cars, dinner for his daughter's volleyball team, TV for his son's apartment, and so on. No real attempt to hide any of it. The accounting department started complaining about it, and he told them to just put it in. Finally, the head accountant just said no, she couldn't sign her name to this stuff anymore. The president of the company fired her on the spot, even calling the police to help escort her out of the building, telling them he suspected her of embezzling but couldn't prove it, but he feared for his safety. A year later, the scumbag golden parachuted out of the company, and the company barely survived. Using the company card to buy gas for a company car that was on a paid fuel card separate from the company credit card, and then also expensing the receipts for both the credit card fuel bill and the driven mileage. I used to review credit card purchases. Employees would have to submit receipts and explain what each line item was for. One guy brought a $500 watch and wrote down on his spreadsheet, "Watch to replace my broken one." Apparently he felt his personal wristwatch was work-related and worthy of replacing with a Swiss watch with automatic movement. I'm horrified to even have my corporate card in my wallet. but I did show it to a cashier to get a student discount. He asked if I had a student ID, so I flashed my university corporate credit card and he believed it. A little different, but my former coworker didn't have a corporate card, so he expensed and was reimbursed for parking tickets because there was no legal parking in Philly. I once brought a Toblerone and I got caught. A guy I worked with went down a dark road, like leaving Las Vegas dark. He maxed it in a month on booze and electronics. A trip was in there too. He lost his job and moved to Arizona. Buy a $20,000 mail-order bride, frantically try to get money to pay it off, obviously can't hide it, and gets fired. Did he at least get to keep the bride, or did the company take possession of her too? I have no clue. Old company I worked for. Give guy corporate credit card to go buy groceries for the home he was working at. 3 hours later, he didn't come back or return calls. My boss looked at the account to see if there was any action on it. Lo and behold, a $600 charge at a Best Buy. Safe to say the guy thoroughly stepped in it and was not answering his phone, but did respond to a text message that basically said, "Frick you, I quit," the next morning. He was also thoroughly disappointed when he came to get his last check and realized it was about $30. Late 90s, the superintendent of my local school board district used a district credit card to buy about $300 worth of dinners and booze for school board members during a business trip in New York. Got charged with theft because of the alcohol purchases, even though he reimbursed the district when he did his expense report. After a lot of investigation and court time, the superintendent was fined $100 and had to resign. He then had to settle for becoming the superintendent of the Houston Independent School District, the 7th largest district in the nation. That'll learn him. Give it to an exotic dancer before passing out. They swiped as many times as possible before leaving. He allegedly paid the $10,000 bill out of pocket so he wouldn't be discovered. My dad and I bought Pokemon cards. Granted, it was his business. Buy lunch at Hooters for his employee because he wanted to be friends with him. He had only recently gotten the card back because it was taken away after his last purchase of an $80 magic kit. I rented a Lamborghini with mine, but I didn't expense it to the company, so it's fine, as long as I paid the bill by the end of the month, which I did. I just wanted to cross that off my bucket list, and I don't have any credit cards of my own, so I took the opportunity. Epic all-day drink-a-thon at the pub during a team meeting that was supposed to be 2 hours. 8 hours later, and covered in someone else's spew with my tie wrapped around my head, I stumbled back into the office. At the next Christmas party, the boss headbutted the supervisor who was responsible. He was a real jerk anyway, although I felt bad for him as he was an alcoholic. Yeah, the company is no more and still owes me $4,000. My old boss took me and a few co-workers out for a few drinks to celebrate my last day. Dropped about $5,000 on the entire night. About half of that was at the exotic dance club. I was 16 and I got a corporate card for my first job. As I was so excited, I posted a Snapchat of me and the card while some rap song about money was playing and you could see every number, but I deleted it a little bit later. That's probably why most jobs for 16-year-olds don't get corporate cards. A few years ago, my boss, at the time, sent me with the company card to buy him a calculator. I asked no questions and promptly returned with said device, only to watch him open up Microsoft Excel and say that he was finally going to be able to finish his totals column. I love this one. Nowhere near the blatant corruption of some of the others, just a whole kind of other stupidity. It's almost cute. This is a Michael Scott blunder right here. There's not even any evil intent or gross skeeviness like most of the others. Just a sweet dumb boy trying to do his job. I had a boss who had a quick meeting with someone in Sydney, Australia. Naturally, he wanted to fly first class. Well, he couldn't be without his wife, so she came too. And his kids? Sure, let's throw them on the bill. Well, they couldn't possibly sleep anywhere nasty, so they got 2 suites in a 5-star hotel. Lunch and dinner every day for 4 people, plus entertainment, all on the company dime. For that 1 2-hour meeting, he and his family spent 3 weeks on a luxury holiday in Australia. Now it's been many years, but I believe the flight bill itself came to $35,000. Hotel was $30,000. Dinners, show, entertainments, amusement parks, sure, why not? And fancy wines were an equally large sum. In the end, seeing as this was a small company, 3 people were made redundant because this guy drained the pot. He was the CEO after all. He quickly came back as a contractor. He was the CEO after all.
So his punishment for ruining the lives of 3 people and costing the company $100,000 was that his family got a nice holiday, and I guess he had to follow some different tax laws or something. Must be nice to be the CEO, huh? And I've just checked on the company, they've recovered, they're doing a booming business, and he's gone. Buy a water pick to water their plants. I accidentally pocket-bought my friend's racy adult novel off Amazon because yay, one-click ordering. I've never been so glad that they're reasonable about returns for accidental digital purchases because I did not want to explain to our purchasing officer why our department bought a book of vampire adult material. Lesson learned. Always log out of your work Amazon account. When did a random nobody absolutely blow your frickin' mind? I went to my local racquetball court looking for a pickup game when I was in my early 20s. This was in San Diego back in 91 or 92. I was reasonably athletic and I was just starting to consider myself competent at racquetball. Anyway, the only other player there was a 70-year-old retired naval officer. He offers a match, so lacking more athletic opposition, I accepted. Never before and never since have I been beaten so badly at anything. He completely and effortlessly destroyed me. We played 3 matches and I scored only 1 point. I was left exhausted and utterly broken. He barely broke a sweat. I don't think I've picked up a racket since then, so utter was my defeat. In short, senior citizen crushes cocky 21-year-old 63-1 playing racquetball. Mullet Man. I met this guy, a construction worker. He was gruff, older, and rocked a long mullet. The party in the back was thick and went all the way down his back. I thought he was just a crusty, kinda white trash dude, and started calling him Mullet Man in my head and to my co-workers. We worked for a competing firm and saw him at industry events. Fast forward a few months, and I hear him telling someone how his niece has a terminal illness, and he's growing out his hair for her to have a new wig made. He'd heard that untreated hair works best, so he figured his would be ideal. I've never felt like such a jerk. You go, Mullet Man, you beautiful human. I worked at an electronics retailer 2 years ago. One day, a middle-aged farmer, and I mean farmer, complete with overalls, boots, and a straight-billed cap, came into the store looking for a cell phone. I immediately sold him the simplest, easiest phone we carried, going into great detail on every feature, including the camera, sending text messages, and every imaginable part of the phone's hardware and software. The next day, the same guy comes in, and I immediately think he's having phone trouble and resign myself to an hour of explanation. He asks for an external hard drive because he wants to move his custom kernel of Linux to his new computer. I can't remember the exact details, I was totally floored by his request. He then spots my textbook on international political economy. My boss was very forgiving of me studying in slow times, and the farmer asks me 15 minutes of in-depth questions on one of the main contemporary theorists in the field, Karl Polanyi, beyond even what myself and my classmates had asked. The class was graduate level. Needless to say, I was berating myself for ever stereotyping this seemingly backwards farmer from the 60s. You've got a lot of time to sit and think about stuff when you're watching corn grow. Nice overreaching lesson on the majority of these stories: do not judge a book by its cover. A truly ancient saying that you think most of us would have had the sense to accept by now. Apparently not. Met a guy while going through college. He was in my major and most of my classes. He was blazed most of the time and had no fricking brains about him. He failed almost every class due to not trying or slacking off, and was always in an insane panic the last 2 weeks of classes to not fail. He ended up repeating classes a lot. At some point, I decided to switch colleges. I graduate this December. I got a LinkedIn request from him yesterday. He has finished his master's in engineer technology now, and has buttloads of recommendations on his profile from employers that he did internships under, all giving him glowing reviews about his work ethic. I left this guy in the dust 3 years ago. Sometime between then and now, he cleaned up his act and worked so hard that not only did he close the year gap in courses between me and him due to all his failings, but he also accelerated ahead 2 additional years and finished a master's. How the frick did he do that, Fred? I watched you come to class blazed for a year, and then you cram 4 years of work into 2? Dance off with a 6'2", 150-pound white man. Never again.
Tall, white, skinny dudes are black men in disguise.
We've got the moves like Gumby.
I have a friend who has dyslexia and is incredibly shy even around his close friends. We did an electronics project in high school where we had to design an electronic game or a metronome or some other crap. He chose to make a game and made this incredible device that played a happy little tune when you won and a sad tune when you lost. It sat in a well-molded and polished box and had a segment display on the front. I was in awe sitting there with my crappy little metronome that didn't even work. A group of family friends and I went paintballing for the first time, which ended up having a bunch of the kids against the parents. Being young and cocky, we thought it would be a stomp and marched confidently into the woods. What we forgot was that all of our parents were immigrants from Taiwan. Taiwan has mandatory military service. I was reminded of that fact rather harshly when I tried to ambush my dad. The paintball in my face pinned this fact to my memory forever. I worked with this kid who was kinda pudgy. He wanted to be a Navy SEAL. Everyone laughed. He did it. He became a Navy SEAL. Similar story. When I was in AIT, like Army Vocational School for enlisted people, the airborne recruiters came around and gave this presentation about airborne school, and at the end they asked for volunteers to sign up and attend the school after they completed AIT. Now, the only real benefits of going to airborne school are the few extra bucks every pay period just for having the training, and the prestige of having that red beret. Maybe a dozen people from our company ended up signing up for the school. It was mostly who you'd expect. The hooah guys who thought they were hot crap and wanted to prove it to everyone. Except for one guy, Curtis. Curtis is an odd fellow. He was in his early 20s, short, pudgy, and goofy. Whenever he walked past someone, other enlisted people of course, he'd cross his eyes and pull a silly face. He joked around a lot, was a very social and cool guy, but he wasn't exactly, tough. Not someone who seems like airborne material. So naturally, all of the other guys who signed up at airborne school started talking crap about him. How he was going to wash out in the first weeks, among other things. AIT came to an end and we all went on to our first duty stations. I'd added a lot of people from my AIT company on my Facebook account, and one day I was looking through the newsfeed and I saw a picture of Curtis in a red beret. Turns out he was the only person from our company to graduate from airborne school. All those crap talkers and tough guys are washed out. The chubby little goof now rocks the raspberry beret. What a frickin' trooper. Every time I play StarCraft. How the frick does he have 10 carriers? This is bullcrap, it's been 35 seconds! I'm working as a production assistant on a reality TV show. We had to shoot at a record store in a very impoverished, crime-laden area of the Bronx, and we had a celebrity or two with us. So we hire some security people to keep the local riffraff at bay. In the past, the security guys had been overzealous, rude, giant bouncer butthole-like dudes, so we're filming and a celebrity walks in. A crowd's already gathered, and they're getting loud and being obnoxious. This one super thuggish 20-something-year-old starts pushing his way through the crowd and gets to the door but gets stopped by one of the bouncers. Now, this bouncer guy is a 250 or so pound black dude who's a fricking monster, not to mention he has a piece on him. I'm freaking out because Thug Life is getting pushy and yelling at the security guy, yelling at me and being a butthead. Bouncer says, "Baby, you know I want to let you in here. I love you, man, but I can't. It's my job and you know how it is. I got kids, and with that style of yours, I'm sure you got yourself a hot mama back home too." Thuggish kid goes, "Aight, man," and slaps and hugs the security guy, then walks out. Situation entirely diffused. Security guy looks at me with this huge grin and says, "You gotta kill him with kindness, baby." I hear this is a great tactic for confrontation in general for people who come in just determined to hate on everything. Say you're sorry you didn't like it, did my best to make it good, tell them something you like about their appearance, if applicable, and apparently the majority of the time they'll apologize, say they were having a bad day and leave. Cute when it works out, no promises that it will though. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I found out one of my dumber friends had the unique ability of knowing how long anything would take. Anything. She was not the brightest button, failed out of college, and made terrible financial decisions, but damn if she didn't know how long it would take to go to Walmart, get gas, and come home. 34 minutes. If you gave her a highway marker, she'd tell you down to the minute how far away you were from your house. It was incredible. I've never seen anything like it, and she was never wrong. The little woman who was my first partner in Taekwondo.
I was a much taller white belt and she was a green belt. That was the first day I watched the gymnasium ceiling pass overhead in a slow, dreamy way, followed by the sound of my landing. I was roughly about 8 or 9, so me, my mom, 2 brothers and a friend all went to the cinema. We ended up getting out of the cinema at like 10. As we were walking back to the car, I kind of dropped back a little bit as I was in my own world. All I heard from behind me was a teen's voice getting my attention. Unaware of any real dangers in life, at such a tender age, and my mum a few meters up ahead from me, I turned around. Soon as I turned, one of the kids knees me in the stomach and the other one punched me in the face. The worst bit was I couldn't even shout as I was winded. A few seconds pass, and I shouted. My mum turned and saw me on the floor and started sprinting for these kids. She ran straight past me, and I can imagine she was probably thinking, "Screw him, they're going to be eating through a straw." So right in front of me, my mum grabbed one of them and started punching the 16-year-old kid in the face, throwing him around like a rag doll. The other one was shouting for her to stop, and he ran up to my mum and she did literally the same to him. But I could see blood all over this other one's jacket. She had ripped part of his ear. Security came over not so long after, and then the cops. These kids were arrested and nothing came of my mum kicking 7 shades of crap out of them. Turns out they'd been going around the Metro Center, where the cinema was, shoplifting, pickpocketing, and being all-round urethras. Safe to say everyone in school knew the next day. I imagine it was a good bully deterrent as well. When I was going through college, I was put into a group for a group project with a guy that I'd been paired with before. He had done nothing. It was awful. We ended up picking up all of his slack last time, and I wasn't looking forward to doing that again. Well, long story short, apparently he'd had a little come-to-Jesus moment with his advisor and realized he needed to put effort into graduating. That guy frickin' carried us. 11 out of 10 stars. It was amazing. Group leader asked him to do something, and he knocked it out of the frickin' park. We got our 100% on the project. Top grade in our class. My grandpa has Parkinson's, and in the last few years he's been getting really frail to the point where you can't feel anything between the skin and the bone. Anyway, taking care of him was becoming a lot for my step-grandmother, so we tried finding a good nursing home for him. At the home where he went, people treated him so badly that he had a flashback to being a prisoner of war in the Korean War. My grandma got a call that they found him 3 miles away, perfectly fine, but we all thought the guy couldn't even get out of bed on his own. My grandfather's getting close to dying now, and he certainly did a lot during his life. It was good to hear that he still had some of that in him, when he just seemed like a shell before. My father-in-law. My mother-in-law raised my husband and his brother, and my father-in-law was always kind of this quiet presence. She always said he was disinterested and didn't care about the boys. She said a lot of really awful things about him. Their divorce was messy, but I took what she said at face value. Fast forward to now. When I got laid off, my father-in-law, in his quiet way, invited us to stay at his house until I finished school, with our 2 crazy toddlers and our old cat, who doesn't always make it to the litter box. I was hesitant at first, but we didn't really have options. Turns out he's the salt-of-the-earth guy. He works and reads and builds stuff for our babies to play with, like a 6-inch tall working windmill, and he's the best grandpa any kid could ever want. Turns out he always loved the boys deeply, but struggled with depression since my mother-in-law took them and left. He's brought everyone birthday presents, school clothes, and things since they were little, even though they had no idea. I also found out that he's been paying off all of mother-in-law's bills even after the boys grew up and moved out. When I asked him why, he said, "She's the mother of my children. I don't really want to see her struggle." One of the best people I know. I hope one day we can repay him for all of his kindness. I was in high school, and behind my friend's house there was some farmland. One day, for whatever reason, 4 of us decided to go out there and build a fort. It ended up turning out awesome, and we decided to spend the night in it. We filled up an empty water bottle with his parents' vodka and built a fire out there. The owner of the property must have seen the fire and didn't appreciate us trespassing, so he called the cops. Around midnight, 5 or 6 cops surrounded us. We were all underage and we tried to convince the cops we weren't drinking. It worked because we hadn't really started drinking much of the vodka yet, and the cops didn't think to open our water bottle. So the cops tell us as long as we put out the fire and take down the fort, we wouldn't get into any trouble. My idiot friend says, "Okay, officer, we'll just go ahead and put this fire out and be on our way," and dumps the bottle into the fire. Whoosh! Instantly in handcuffs. I underestimated my friend that day. He was that stupid. Maybe I overestimated him. Oh well, still a funny story. And here I was waiting for the story of how one of those rural country cops turned out to be a super sleuth who completely blew your mind by identifying the viscosity and slight color difference of vodka in the bottle. But nope, just a truly amazing level of dumb. Well done, friend. I did outreach with working girls from the street for a few years. One went missing under suspicious circumstances, and there was evidence that she had been murdered, but no body. The police had the guy but needed to build a strong case. He was known to some of the women, so the cops wanted to talk with as many as possible. Most did, but there was one who was rumored to have strong evidence of the man's intent. She was so strung out all the time, and literally months went by of her blowing off appointments with the cops to tell what she knew. She would hide from them as she was scared. They finally picked her up on the street and she talked to them, as by then they knew that making appointments with her was a dead end. It turns out she did have some great info, and they wanted her to appear in court. We helped her as much as possible, got her a decent outfit and toiletries, and kept reminding her of the date and location of the trial. She didn't show up when she was due, much to everyone's disappointment. Next day of the trial, she walked in, clean, in a nice outfit, and sober. Testified very well. In fact, impressively. She said later that she had gone on a huge bender the day before due to being nervous and knew she wouldn't come across well. He is now serving a life sentence. Really didn't think she had it in her, but she happily proved us all wrong. I underestimated my cousin. She always seemed to be the queen bee of middle school, and I resented her for it. But one day I heard that she completely ditched the in-crowd because they were making fun of some kid. I realized I'd been completely wrong about her character and that I'm extremely proud of her for this. I was arguing with a customer at work. I, like a pretentious jerk, tried to reinforce a point I was making by quoting the only line I knew from Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. She, in a fit of anger, proceeded to give me the next 20 lines of that character's soliloquy all from memory. I got owned. Big time. My kid. So he was born with some limb differences. Missing bones, clubbed hands, 3 fingers instead of 4 because one finger had to be made into thumbs. Was looking forward to having a boy who was into sports, but I just figured that wasn't going to happen. Didn't think he could hold a baseball bat or throw a ball straight, among other things. Figured soccer or running, if anything, would be his thing. When he was 2, he was really into hockey. I figured, he's 2, it'll pass. Nope, the little guy learned how to skate in diapers, but had a hard time holding the stick. We wrote to a whole bunch of hockey glove manufacturers, and Reebok had just brought CCM, or the other way round, and they made him custom gloves. They didn't work, but it was really freaking cool they did that. The kiddo got the first pair of RBK gloves in the world. Anyway, so he turns 4 and wants to play t-ball and soccer, and gets older and tries lacrosse, all the while playing hockey. I figure he'll give up because he won't be very good at those things, but he is. He's actually decent at soccer, baseball, lacrosse, basketball and golf, you name it. Not a star, clearly, but good enough to contribute to the team. So he turns 8 and his older buddy from the neighborhood is a hockey phenom. Gets invited to be on all these AAA summer teams, so my kid wants to do that. Well, he can contribute to the team, but he's nothing like this kid. I let him try out for a new team in the area, but they don't get enough kids for his birth year. He tries again, next year, same deal. They take a couple of kids from his birth year and put them in with the older group, but not him. So the 3rd year, he makes the team and improves immensely. But this team isn't that great, being a new team and all. So he decides he's going to play in the NHL, and to do that he has to play Division 1 hockey, and to do that he wants to get a scholarship to a prep school near here, and to do that he needs to make a higher level AAA summer team. The kid has it all planned out. So I tell him, look, crazy talent like Crosby or Gretzky doesn't come along all that often, so teams still have to fill their rosters, but there's a lot of competition, and if you want to make it to that level, you have to put in the work to get there. This team he wants to make is ridiculous money, even in hockey terms. And I tell him if he wants to play summer hockey for fun, that's no problem, but if he wants to play on the expensive one, I'm going to need to see him working hard. No asking to skip practice. I'm willing to pay if he's willing to put in the work. I said nothing else. He's 11 at this time. Wouldn't you know it, the little crapbag puts in the work and makes the team. So now he's 11, and he's got scouts coming to games and invitations to play in tournaments, and the special camps are coming in. He's been schmoozing the nearest juniors coach, and one night he raced a bunch of the players on the team, who were all ages 17 to 20, and kicked 2 of their butts. One of them was 6'5" to my kid's 5'4". The coach tracked me down and told him he was saving a spot for my kid on his team. He's gotten himself TV interviews, articles in the newspaper, and spots on teams by being charming, good-looking, polite, and by being a hockey player who works hard and is coachable and puts the team's needs before his own, and sometimes over players, who are a tad better skill-wise than he is. So yeah, I totally underestimated my own kid. What an awesome story of grit and just a great attitude. And all that success and pre-planning at the age of 12? The guy's more onto his life pre-puberty than some of us are at 30. Amazing kid, he deserves all the best. Underestimated, but in a good way. There was a Super Smash Bros. Brawl tournament in 2009 at the dorms, open to all residents. It was a team tournament, so you got matched up with one person for the whole night. I got a soft-spoken guy whose first words I heard were, I thought this one had Mega Man in it. So I'm cursing several Greco-Roman gods at getting probably the biggest noob in the room. Turns out he was the best in the room and was just trolling me. Took on everyone and won with a little help from me, here and there. We later played against each other in 1v1 tournaments and he beat me by a smidge, but he helped me get a $25 Best Buy gift card. I invited my girlfriend along to paintball for my 21st birthday. Her grandparents owned a farm, so I knew she wasn't a princess, but she certainly isn't low maintenance these days. The game was Capture the Flag. The field was set up in a valley with a team on either side and a single meter-wide footbridge connecting the two sides. The flag was sitting in the middle of the bridge, the only cover being two waist-high walls on either side. We pushed up to the flag and were pinned by a vicious volley of vivid viscera. Naturally, I'm scared crapless and I hunker down. Clearly all that time playing first-person shooters hasn't trained me to be a super soldier at all. Just as I'd mustered enough courage to keep my head above the cover, I see my girlfriend blaze past with reckless abandon, shooting wildly. She nabs the flag, runs back past me and back towards base. She never got hit once. I have never been more stunned or impressed than that moment. In short, my girlfriend wears the pants and I go number 2 in mine.
What were serial killers like in person before they got caught? A guy I work with used to carpool to school with Aaron Hernandez. A mutual friend used to go to high school with him and said he was a pretty normal kid for a while. He said he really changed when he went down to Florida for a summer for probably some football-related stuff. When he came back, he looked like a different person, all tatted up, bigger and taller. Spent a summer in Ames, Iowa with some family. Jeffrey Dahmer was a neighbor of a family friend. My cousin and I built a haunted house out of a playhouse in the backyard. Mostly we blindfolded the neighborhood kids and led them through. We had a bowl of grapes with some oil on them and shoved the kids' hands into it and told them it was eyeballs. We formed cold, congealed spaghetti into what we told them were brains. I personally led Jeffrey through, and every time someone says his name, I wonder if I was the cause of his problems. He was a loner in one of the biggest schools in the state. He wasn't weird or creepy or smelly or anything, but the popular kids would pick on him. He was friends with my girlfriend. We were going to hang out one weekend, but he bludgeoned his mother to death and ran away with his girlfriend instead. I'm probably relatively unique in that I know 3 people on death row, and one other murderer. Case number 1 was a completely horrible human being. Threatened my life in high school, and I always figured he'd kill someone in a bar fight. Instead, him and 2 friends went, and he had one of them kill the husband, while he chased the wife down and shot her in the back. I was called to testify for the prosecution at his last death penalty trial. He was huge and scary as heck, and a truly, truly horrible human being. Based on the testimony I heard, he still is. The second was kind of an odd guy, but pretty nice in person. I played Starfleet battles with him. Him and a friend killed a lady. No idea why. He seemed more of a follower than a leader, and that's pretty much how the murder went down. He's still on death row. The third was more friends with my ex-wife. He even watched our kids a couple of times. He was quiet and seemed friendly. And finally, this other kid I knew in high school. He seemed pretty quiet, he read westerns a lot. Being a big book reader, I chatted a few times with him. He seemed nice. One day he took a shotty to school and at lunch blasted the guy convicted of taking advantage of his brother. He ended up getting a slap on the wrist for it. I felt he should have gotten a medal knowing the details that came out later. I suspect the judge gave him the least that he could. About 10 years before he took the lives of 2 women, he came to our house. He was about 16 or 17, on his bicycle with a chipmunk he had hung with a rope and was swinging it round and acting weird. My brother and I were home alone, and it was one time I know that my brother was scared in. We kept the doors locked, and he peed in our grill and left. The whole time he was yelling, but I'm not sure that it was at us. Yeah, that young man probably had a lot going on both in his home life and in his own head. So although you may have been on the receiving end of all that, he wasn't just angry at you. Cripes. A few years ago, I went to a gas station late at night and ran into an old friend, a guy I knew who had been serving time for some heinous crap. I heard he got out, and him and I were cool, so I didn't think much of it. He was with another guy, and right away, the sight of the two of them sitting outside a gas station at a payphone made me uneasy. Teardrop tattoos on their faces and a desperate look about them. But my friend recognized me right away and came to say what's up. His friend immediately asked for a few dollars to get a cigar. I told him, hold up, and I'll get him on my way out. The whole time in that store, I felt uneasy. It looked like they were looking for a lick, and I didn't want that to be me. So I brought a cigar and gave him like $3. I chatted for about 5 minutes with my old friend and asked about his brother and stuff. As I hopped in my car, his friend asked if they could get a ride down the street. I got in and started the car and said, nah, can't. He started to insist, but my friend interrupted him and said, nah, my man has somewhere to be, he's got a bunch of kids that are probably crying. About 2 weeks later, 2 bodies were found smoldering along a popular jogging trail. The convicted murderer was the guy, along with my friend. The bodies were found within walking distance of the gas station I saw them at. My friend self-deleted about a month later. Both of those guys confessed to friends and family that they didn't know how to act outside of jail, and that they didn't feel like they were ready to be out. They tried to check themselves into psych hospitals, complaining of hearing voices, but they were turned away. The bodies were 2 high school kids who stole their neighbors' weapons and were trying to sell them quickly to get some green herb, I believe. These guys robbed the kids and tied them up for days. This all happened about 5 blocks from where I was living, in a relatively safe neighborhood in Florida. Oh, and the person with my friend was Jesse Davis, one of the convicted murderers in the Cady Way trial murders. I knew 2. They both grew up next door to one another. One had emotional problems and could be a decent guy one-on-one. We hung out a bit and rode bikes occasionally. He killed a guy in a substance deal and stuffed the body down a well. The other was a great guy, but he didn't give an F about anyone outside his circle of friends and his family. We'd hunted and fished together every day. He once told me he couldn't feel remorse if he killed someone outside his family. I thought it was just talk. This year, his sister's husband started whacking her, and this guy ambushed him in a country road and blasted him to death. Still, a decent guy in my book. I knew a serial committer of the Unspeakable act. He was my kid's assistant little league coach and a great dad, one of the coolest people I knew. He loved his kids, was at all of their events, and worked hard as a doctor to support his family. His arrest shocked the crap out of the whole neighborhood. My cousin went to school with Timothy McVeigh. She says he was a really creepy loner who'd talk about conspiracy theories all the time. Jonathan David Drew, convicted of taking the life of Houston waitress Tina Flood, 23, in December of 1998. Drew was pulled over by a police officer who found Flood beaten and barely alive in Drew's front passenger seat. She died soon afterwards. Drew was suspected of several instances of the Unspeakable Act, and a private investigator has speculated Drew could be responsible for the slaying of Jessica Lee Kane. A search of Drew's former home in League City, where his parents still lived, produced a vial containing several human teeth. Yep, Jonathan David Drew was good friends with several people I hung out with. I knew him as an acquaintance. There were stories of him getting stuck out in the killing fields on at least 2 occasions late at night and having to be towed out. He was only convicted of the 1 murder, but there is speculation he's responsible for several more. Not me, but a buddy of mine was friends with the Boston bomber at University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. He says they used to hang out, drink, and do normal college stuff together. One of those you'd never expect it kind of situations. The thing that still gets me is that when he fled the scene, he briefly went back to Dartmouth to do whatever he had to do. But while there, he hit the gym with my buddy, and the story was all over every news outlet on TV. He turns to my buddy at the gym and proceeds to tell him, "How could anyone do something like this?" My sister's best friend growing up. Her family was really strict growing up, and she kind of took that on with her son. Wouldn't let him watch regular TV, he was homeschooled and that kind of thing. So she gets married because she got pregnant, again because she did this with her son's dad, and they move away. She joins the army, he cheats while she's at boot camp, they break up. Then she moves with other relatives in Oregon, and eventually he moves there too to be closer to his kid. Breaks it off with the other girl. They start to co-parent well and get along again. Everything's okay. They go on a camping trip in the mountains for his birthday with her sister. Then her and the sister proceed to shoot him 13 times while he slept and dragged and threw his body off a cliff. They come home to try and cover it up with all fake Facebook alibis and receipts from some gas station and say he got lost in the woods. The Rangers find him 2 days later, and 2 days after that, she's arrested along with her sister. Her sister flipped on her immediately and they gave her 18 months with time served. The main perp got life without parole. She said she did it to make sure he couldn't take her kids away. Now the kids live with family and have lost both parents. I always knew that family was off. In short, my sister's best friend planned and killed her ex-husband to protect the kids, and then threw him off a cliff, was found and convicted, and kids have no parents now. Someone told me they made an episode of Snapped Off for her story. So yeah, I guess I can say the name of the episode. It's Patricia McCallum. Cripes. Protecting kids here may have been code for ensuring we don't have to share custody anymore. As much as being a child of divorce sucks, I can't imagine that the fallout of that was any better, and I can't imagine that the co-parenting was so bad that it was even worth the risk of getting caught. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I dated and was friends with a guy who was arrested in a huge CP bust in my area. We'll call him John. He was a very sweet and kind guy, the kind who'd do just about anything for a friend. We met at a class and we hit it off right away, which led to a sort of relationship. We split on good terms, he had different ideas about relationships, so we broke up before anyone got too involved. We remained very good friends who'd just hang out every weekend, spend some time at each other's houses, playing video games, or just get into general messing around. About 3 months later, he started dating a girl from his job and took her on vacation to New York City. They'd only been dating for a few weeks, but in true fashion, he was head over heels for her. He sent me a picture of them, and the girl looked so young, I asked if he saw her ID before they'd done the deed. He proudly told me she had just turned 19. He was 43. They split up after she'd spent the weekend at his place, and her father came looking for her. Her father went ballistic, and that was the end of it. I started putting the pieces together, and I realized I was looking at one gigantic red flag. I was 27 when we were dating, but he always loved to play up how young I looked. He was also very into age play during the deed, which was one of the reasons we split. He started dating other girls between the ages of 18 and 21, but they all had the same hallmark of definitely not looking like the age of consent, to the point that they were usually stopped from entering clubs or bars because the bouncers assumed the girls had fake IDs or borrowed an older relative's ID. He started drinking more, picking up working girls, going into massage parlors, and being all around that creepy old guy. He chalked it up to going through a rough patch, but there was something still very off about him. He went to New York City with another girl and asked me and another mutual friend to watch his house for the week. I got a frantic phone call from my friend saying that John's house had been broken into and all of his electronics were stolen. At the time, I was mid-move and John had allowed me to store several boxes of electronics at his place after the storage facility I had them in had been broken into. I went over and sure enough, all of John's TVs, computers, game systems, and other things were gone. But my things were left alone. I found that odd because I had a flat-screen TV and a flat-screen computer in their boxes sitting in his dining room. If he had been robbed, why didn't they take my things? When the cops showed up, all they'd tell us is that it wasn't a burglary, but wouldn't give us any more information. That's when I found the search warrant on his kitchen table. John came back from New York City and he asked me to drive him to the state trooper station. All he'd say was that he got a phone call asking him to show up there. Once there, he was immediately arrested. They met us in the parking lot and yanked him out of my car before I had a chance to put it into park. One of the detectives asked me to come to the station and they interviewed me, asking how I knew him and so on and so forth. After about an hour, they let me go outside to have a cigarette. That's when they told me he was being arrested for 22 counts of downloading and distributing loads of CP. They also told me it had been going on for a very long time, long enough that surveillance on his house had pictures of me coming and going. So yeah, that's my story. Sorry it's so long. I dated someone who murdered a guy with his friends. It was personal and it made national news. A few months after he and I broke up, I was dating someone else. He called me and said that he was never going to be with me because he messed everything up. I was busy and I blew him off. A week later, after a holiday, I got a call from the jail, but it was at like 4 in the morning and I accidentally hung up. A few years later, I looked him up and realized the call was him. I'm afraid that he holds a grudge, and as his release creeps closer, I'm getting worried. So what was he like before? He was melodramatic. After we broke up, he called me and played Cry Me a River and told me that we were just like the song. He beat himself up quite a lot. Everything was a huge deal. We argued a lot and he was easily influenced. He didn't have a good relationship with his parents, so his friends were all he had. He had a history of disciplinary actions in school. Respect was a huge thing. Feeling disrespected to him was the worst thing in the world. He didn't care about school. He was funny. This guy isn't famous, not yet anyway. All this happened just about a month ago, maybe a little longer. The guy's name is Adam Densmore. He killed his girlfriend and cut her into pieces. He put the body in a couple of suitcases and took their 1-year-old daughter on the road. I always thought he was an intelligent guy, but apparently he wasn't the smartest, as he immediately drove from where he was living in Colorado to his hometown in northwest Louisiana, straight to his parents' house. He dropped the suitcases in 2 separate locations along the way. Someone found one of them and he was arrested. As far as I know, they still haven't found the other suitcase. I knew him, but not very well. We used to frequent the same bar. He'd sit in the corner with a beer and read. He was rude to anyone who tried to speak to him. He had that whole, "Can't you see I'm reading?" attitude. In most cases, I understand that attitude, but not in a bar. Never made sense to me. We talked a few times, but only talked at length once. I remember it being an enjoyable conversation. He was intelligent and well-spoken. Also, a good-looking guy, but not exactly charming. One thing I remember is that he'd say, "Gods," in place of, "Oh my God." I know he lived somewhere near me because I'd see him walking around the neighborhood on occasion with a big walking stick. So yeah, he was a bit of a strange guy, but I was shocked when I heard about what happened. It still feels weird to realize I know someone who would do something like that. Okay, mine wasn't famous, but it was still messed up. Brett Pearson was high on crystal and killed his mother and also injured his father. He cried crocodile tears and acts like he regrets it, but I knew him and I know for a fact that he doesn't regret a thing. I went to school with him for a few years. Myself and others were both repeatedly intimidated by him in both stalking and violent manners. There was just something off about him. The only friends he had were the problem kids and the major buttholes at school. He'd make super inappropriate comments in class towards teachers and joked about school mass tragedies and would say things just for shock value. But he was a charmer and got away with everything. I know for a fact he doesn't regret killing his mom. The murder happened only a few blocks from my house. I think the part of this that I'm having the hardest time relating to the rest was that he was apparently charming enough to get away with this stuff. But then again, Ted Bundy was a whole thing, wasn't he? So maybe this guy is the crystal-addicted version of him. Sounds like a creep. I'm glad he's put away now. Oh, and speaking of the big, charming, handsome psychopath himself, here he is in the next story. Obligatory not me, but my mum saw Ted Bundy running through the woods after he escaped prison. They realized who it was after the cops came searching door to door. Not directly, but I know several people who knew Willie Picton before he was arrested. I worked with a lady that had her husband murdered. She was a bossy, condescending, arrogant piece of white trash. Rather nicely attractive though, and very openly flirtatious. She was about 15 years older, but I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about it. Wasn't surprised when they finally nailed her for the crime. Everyone suspected she did it. I sat next to Jeffrey Dahmer at a bar in Milwaukee. I guess I just wasn't to his taste. My boyfriend and his friend kidnapped 2 people, drove them out to a field, and blasted them execution style. He was a really good guy except for that whole killing thing, but we were young and impulsive. I often think about reaching out to him, but time changes people, prison changes people, and I'm not quite sure what I'd say. I was taught in a pottery class by Margaret Bain and good friends with Stephen Bain when growing up in Papua New Guinea. I don't remember anything unusual about any of the family, but I remember vividly reading in the newspaper in Papua New Guinea about their deaths in New Zealand. Still not 100% clear whether it was just Stephen's dad or his brother as well that committed the murders. I didn't know the killer, but as adults, I met a guy and we became friends. It took him a few weeks to tell me he had changed his surname as everyone knew his brother, and he felt he'd be judged the same. At the time of the murder, it was classed as one of the most foul in Australian history. He told me even though his brother was locked up, he was scared of him, and he talked about the constant mental, physical, and other unspeakable treatment the children in the family had suffered growing up by his father and cohorts. His brother liked to do a lot of illegal stuff with animals, which was a forewarning of what he'd become. I lost contact with my friend when he moved interstate, and I've tried to find him, because I miss him. I worked with the man who made national news for killing a doctor who worked in a clinic. When I knew him, he was quiet, polite, a nice guy as far as working with him, but he got in with the pro-life people, and if I recall correctly, he was having marital trouble at the time. One of his co-workers had asked him to work a shift for him that day, but he declined, saying he had something to do. Well, we all sure found out what he did. It was pretty shocking, really. Extended family member murdered 2 people and was suspected of murdering another. He and his mother and siblings lived with us for a few months when we were very young children, so young that I only have vague memories of this. It was while his mother was trying to leave her very nasty husband. The husband was a real animal and probably had something to do with the guy turning out the way he did. And what was our main character like? Well, as a young kid, he was just your typical child. Maybe enjoyed getting other people in trouble a bit more than most, but that's about it. As a teen and young adult, he was a very scary character. You'd get a real menacing vibe from him, like he was completely unpredictable. Which was strange because he always acted very calm. You just had this sense that there was way more going on under the surface. As a family member, I always felt safe around him. Strange to say that, I know, but I still always felt like he couldn't be trusted around others. Plus, even though instinctively I felt safe, rationally I knew most likely I wasn't. So I made sure I was never alone with him. You could tell there was something not quite right about him. We were all a little relieved when he died suddenly, still quite young. Eventually, he would have paroled out and someone else would have probably died. Gary M. Heidnick used to frequent a bar popular with veterans that my grandfather met his friends at a few times a month. He was usually quiet, and on Christmas Eve, my grandfather's friend brought the guy a beer and talked to him for a few minutes, thinking he might be a guy with PTSD. Came back and said, "There's a screw loose with that guy." Few weeks later, he got into a fight with someone and my grandfather helped the bartender throw him out. He never came back. When did you walk out of a movie theater and why? I worked at a theater in the late 80s and we had Mystic Pizza. We didn't sell very many tickets to it, and then about 20 minutes in, most everyone would come out demanding their money back. The manager would wait at the door with passes filled out waiting for them. Never could figure out why everyone was so mad about that movie. What's so horrible about it? I've never really heard of it before, but it has a 6.2 on IMDb and a 78% on Rotten Tomatoes. It doesn't look like my cup of tea at all, but it also doesn't look like the kind of thing people would walk out of in droves. I've never seen it, but I believe Mystic Pizza is a pizzeria in Mystic, Connecticut. If people didn't know this, they might be expecting a movie about magical pizza, which sounds awesome. Dinosaur. I was screaming and crying because I was scared of the dinosaurs. My dad dragged me out of the theater. My dad brought me and my brothers to see Jurassic Park in the theaters at 9 p.m. After the T-Rex ate the lawyer, I spent the rest of the movie in the hall crying and terrified. I had nightmares for weeks. My dad and brothers watched the rest of the movie and didn't even check on me. Little girl sobbing in the hallway of a movie theater. Yep, good times. My dad, my 11-year-old sister, and my 21-year-old self thought it would be nice to take my grandma out to dinner and a movie for her birthday. There was a light-hearted comedy in theaters at the time about a grandson who fell on hard times and had to move in with his grandmother, and hijinks ensue. We took my super conservative 87-year-old Christian grandmother to see Grandma's Boy. I think we made it to the point where Alex tickles his pickle in the bathroom before Grandma loudly proclaimed everyone in the theater was going to hell and we had to leave. Still one of my favorite movies to this day. Always think about her when I watch it. I had a guy in high school take me to this on our first date, with his mother sitting right next to us. We got through the whole movie, uncomfortable as heck, and afterwards his mother was so angry. She ended up telling him that I was no good for him if I was able to sit through that filth. I was offended by that, so I took his virginity and dated him for a year. The narrator has now Googled this film, and he's not sure what's funnier. The fact that a solidly not good film is one of someone's favorites, or the fact that someone else lost their virginity to said same complete B-comedy film for green herb users. It's funny as heck, to be honest. It wasn't my choice, but when I was a kid, I went to watch Austin Powers' The Spy Who Shagged Me with my mum and my friend. My mum was already pretty disgusted with the movie during the first 20 minutes. The tipping point for her was when Fat Man was lying in bed with Heather Graham and she puts that little tracker thing up his butt. My mum got furious and said we weren't watching any more of it and we walked into Star Wars Episode 1 instead. Go figure. And I'll clarify, my mum doesn't speak English well, she's from Mexico, so she didn't know anything about the movie and doesn't know what shag means to this day. My parents walked me out of Jumanji as a kid because I couldn't emotionally handle Robin Williams getting hurt. I walked out of Captain America: The Winter Soldier. No, not because it's a bad movie, but because the popcorn machine exploded and the theater caught on fire. Fun times! I had to leave during Titanic. My friend that I was there with began crying hysterically once the ship began sinking and declared she couldn't watch the rest. I was kind of annoyed since it's not like it was a surprise that the ship was going to sink. I only left with her because she was simply inconsolable and making a scene at that point. I saw that movie with my mom, who's from Mexico City, and surprisingly this was a point of history that she had missed out on. The second I heard, "Hey, Stephen, the boat is sinking, and there are not enough lifeboats," was when I knew this was going to be a pretty rough cinematic experience for my mom. I watched it with my mom as well, and she's from Peru, and when the boat started sinking and the people started to drop, she started laughing hysterically. Everyone was gasping or silent, and here's this Latin lady laughing at the death of all these people because she thought it was funny how they dropped off and plopped into the water. Satya, these people are falling down. Watching that thing sink is the reason I did like that movie. The love story's generic as heck, and the old lady just sucks. But I could watch that boat sink all day. Plus, the propeller dude. Bless James Cameron for the propeller dude. Boom. I knew a guy who'd made 2 combat landings with the Marines in World War II, Saipan and Okinawa, and he had to walk out of Saving Private Ryan at the Omaha Beach scene. Oh man, here's my time to shine. So my wife and I have very different taste in movies. For example, she likes every single Hallmark Christmas movie, despite each one having the same fricking plot. Single but empowered woman stumbles into a new situation during Christmas, meets guy who is not her type but rocks her worldview. Christmas magic, fall in love. So we rarely see movies together because of this. Fury Road? Saw it by myself. The only good movie we've recently seen together was Inside Out because we both love Disney and Pixar films. Anyways, back in 2014, we decided to go on a double date with some friends of ours. I tell her she can pick the movie for once because I picked the restaurant, because we also differ on food tastes. She picks Endless Love. From the start, this movie is a train wreck. It's literally the most cliched piece of garbage some movie exec could think up. It's like they dumped every romance trope into a brainstorming meeting and the execs had a field day. Yeah, we'll cast this hot guy and this hot girl. The kids will like that. Hot people sell. Can they act? Who gives a crap? I mean, this thing just spirals out of frickin' control by Act 2. I can't remember all the details, but there's a terminal illness subplot that never gets resolved, and the main girl's brother, oh my. Here's something I do remember. The girl says, "I have no friends for my high school grad party because I'm too rich and goody-goody." The guy says, "So, good girl. I'm brooding, but I'll call the police on another party to get those people over to your party." The party starts, and the weird brother from college says, "I've got a cool college game to play. Let's draw songs out of a hat and you pick a partner and go off for a little bit and then come back and sing a duet of the song." I mean, who the frick has ever heard of that game? How is this a remotely fun party game? Anyway, the movie is bad. People are laughing at parts that aren't meant to be funny because it's so over-the-top drama acting. Near the end, my wife whispers to me, "I'm so sorry." Then it happens. One guy stands up and throws up his hands before leaving with his girlfriend following him out. The exodus has begun. Slowly, people start leaving. If they're not, it's because they're high school students probably making out in the back row. My wife even gets up to leave, and the other couple with us join her. She's shocked that I said that I'm staying. I'm now so enraptured in this piece of crap movie that I have to see how these dumb writers try to wrap things up. In the end, I finished the whole thing while they go to get coffee. When the lights come up, I stand and begin applauding to the shock of the 10 people left in the theater. I feel like I've been trolled by Hollywood. I now own 10 copies of this movie on DVD and I gift them out to friends solely to have someone else to talk about how bad this movie is.
You, sir, are a hero for your commitment to enjoying the garbage film that you paid for, and I'm sure every person in that theater remembered you for a long time afterwards. My only irritation is that you gave 10 DVDs worth of your money to it and might have contributed on a greater scale than most to Hollywood execs thinking that people wanted more of that kind of garbage in the future. What to expect when you're expecting. It wasn't what I expected. The third Twilight film. I was forced to go by my then-girlfriend. The cinema flooded about 40 minutes in, so we got evacuated. I was so happy. I walked out during Last House on the Left. Turns out, a rough scene of the Unspeakable act is not what you want to see when two 16-year-olds go on a date. My first movie date with my ex was Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I had heard all this hype about the book, so I was excited to see it. Yeah, no one told me about that scene either. Wow, that was a first date movie for me too. I left in that part because I had no idea there was that kind of scene, and the guy that I was on a date with was already way creepier in person than his texts had let on. It was not a good vibe. Walked out on Batman: The Dark Knight. The movie started and it was way too loud. Eardrum-burstingly loud. I know I wasn't the only one, because anytime there was a sound above two people talking, the entire theater would flinch or cover their ears. I went to the manager to let him know, and he sighed and said he'd take care of it. A few minutes later, the movie was turned down so quiet that you couldn't hear anyone talking. Every person in the audience would turn their head or lean in when it was quiet. So I let the manager know again, to which he sighed and angrily stomped off. I realized he wasn't sighing because some high school kid didn't know what he was doing. He was angry at me for bothering him. Went back in and the movie was louder than before. I said F it and demanded my money back. At first he refused, and then about 50 people showed up behind me, all demanding the same thing. I saw the movie the same day in another theater and it was perfect. Good movie. Heath Ledger was amazing. I wanted desperately to walk out of The Last Airbender, but that would have meant waiting outside in the rain for an hour for my mum to come pick me up. After finishing the film, I wish I'd sat in the rain. Gamer. My mum took me as a surprise, thinking it was going to be a perfect movie for me. I was in the 6th grade. No point in walking out. Once or twice I've decided to take a nap though. I rarely find the time for a good nap. Batman and Robin. We walked out and saw Men in Black. It was much better. A movie called The Fog. Ooh, the fog kills people. Then stay out of the frickin' fog. It's the 2005 one. Not to be confused with The Mist. If you haven't seen that, it's really good. Don't read anything about it, just watch it, and then maybe report back after. Holy crap, everyone keeps talking about how good The Mist was, and I've been thinking, what? That movie was so bad. Nothing in the movie was good except for when the credits rolled. I think I've been thinking about The Fog the entire time. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. The opening night for The Dark Knight Rises. It wasn't the movie itself, which I loved, but there was this one Joker that messed it up for everyone. I'll never understand why people can't sit down, shut up, and let everyone else watch the movie they've paid for. Anyway, this guy must have seen the movie in advance and kept loudly dropping spoilers. I specifically went to the premiere because I wanted to see it before anyone else had a chance to ruin it for me by telling me what happened. So I cut my losses, left, and came back to watch it the next night. I thought this was going in a much darker direction. Same here, I was braced for it. After messed it up for everyone, I was like, oh crap. In case anyone needs an update on tragic film events from 12 years ago, there was a premiere of The Dark Knight Rises where, unfortunately, someone decided to bring in several weapons and commit a massacre in one of the screenings. The narrator will also admit to getting nervous that the author was speaking about that event. Oof. My friend's dad took us to see South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut. He decided it was too vulgar for us about 20 minutes in, we were 12, and he decided to take us to Hooters instead. 9 out of 10 would do again. Super Babies, Baby Geniuses 2. I was with a friend who was desperate to see it for some frickin' reason. About 40 minutes into it, I reached my limit. I stood up and said, I'll be outside having a smoke, see you when it's over. Rude? Maybe, but I really couldn't handle one more second of that crap fest. Wife and I went to see Daredevil. Turns out we accidentally went into the wrong theater, which was showing How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. We were both looking at each other thinking, this is an awfully strange opening to Daredevil. Once we figured it out, we left and went to the right theater, but in retrospect, we should have just stayed where we were. Not me, but my mom walked out of the first Matrix. She and my aunt had no idea it was a sci-fi movie, and at the beginning of the scene in the car where they rip the thing out of Neo's chest, these two burst out laughing and left the theater. It's hard to remember through 16 years of knowing all about what the Matrix is, but it was because of marketing. They specifically made the previews just showing action, but no explanation. What is the Matrix was the catchphrase. If you're of the right frame of mind, this really worked for you. My friend said I had to see it back in '99 when we went. When Neo woke up in that pod, my fricking head exploded. It's like the Darth Vader and Skywalker thing. I had a rare afternoon off while on tour in Paris, and I decided to see a movie. I brought the ticket, brought some popcorn, sweets, a big drink, and other things. I walked into the theater, sat down, and then promptly got back up again and walked out. In a moment of blithering stupidity, I totally forgot I was in Paris and the movie was in French. I can't speak French. When the 6th Harry Potter movie came out, we had to pretty much drag my friend to see it. He's a military guy who hates fantasy movies. I was shocked he even agreed to go, albeit reluctantly. One of the first lines of the movie was, "Okay, Harry, wand at the ready," and he loudly scoffed. About 10 minutes into the movie, while Harry and Dumbledore were attempting to recruit Slughorn, a lone chair sat in the room of an empty house. I whispered to my friend, "He's the chair." His response was, "If he's the chair, I'm leaving." Sure enough, Dumbledore prodded the chair with his wand. Slughorn's head popped up, exclaiming, "Merlin's beard!" And my friend kept his word. I remember thinking that the movie was alright, and I saw it as an adult, but gosh darn if that description doesn't make it sound like the stupidest thing imaginable. I once took a girl on a first date to go and see The Aristocrats, the Paul Provenza documentary about the alleged dirtiest joke ever told. Personally, I love that stuff, but she was so thoroughly unimpressed that I felt embarrassed after the first 30 minutes and we left. She didn't laugh, smile, or say anything from the start of the film until I dropped her off at her place. We never spoke again. I actually got to meet Paul Provenza a few years later and told him the story. He thought it was pretty funny and gave me some great advice. He said roughly the equivalent to, "Don't sweat it. If a girl can't laugh at something like that, she's not the right one for you anyway." A few years after that, I watched it again with my then-girlfriend, and we both laughed non-stop through the whole thing. She's now my wife. In short, first date disaster watching The Aristocrats. Watched it again later in life with a new girlfriend and then married her. I had to walk out on Passion of the Christ when my sister threw up in the middle of the movie. There was a priest in the theater, and his reaction to it had me in more stitches than Jesus on my way to the car. It's so surreal watching that movie when it came out in theaters packed with uber-religious folks who were watching it as if it were a documentary. At one of the points where Jesus was getting beaten to a pulp, this weeping woman in the movie theater cried out, "You B-words." I had to stifle laughter because it made me think of South Park. I was the cause of a guy walking out of a movie once. His name was Mark, and the movie theater was the Marquee. So for the rest of middle and high school, anytime we wanted to leave early, we'd ask to pull a Marquee Mark. Thought I was on a date with a girl, and she ended up inviting Mark because they'd been talking as well. I ended up going for the handhold during the movie. Middle school, I know. He saw this, called his mother, and got up saying he was going to the bathroom and never came back. Best part of this was my other friend who drove us had to sit through it to drive me home, and Marky Mark is some guy none of us know and had to deal with the whole situation and awkward rejection. She broke up with me 2 days later because I exited the window she was browsing during computer class as a joke. How is that a joke? I don't know either, so don't bother asking. She seemed like the rational type anyway. This was the most middle school story that has ever middle schooled. I'll admit that up until my first reread, I didn't catch your part about middle school, and my imagination was afire thinking that this was just the most hilariously childish workplace or college class in the world. Oh well, hopefully we will get a story of that nature sometime in the future. Dad and I went to see War of the Worlds. I thought it was really dull, so I looked over to see if Dad thought the same so we could leave. And he looked properly into the film, so I didn't say anything and watched the rest of it. Afterwards, Dad said that he was glad that I enjoyed the film, as he hadn't and wanted to leave. He had done the same thing that I'd done and thought I was enjoying it.
I never walked out even if the movie was crap. $10 and more for a ticket I'll fricking endure. I do know about the sunk cost fallacy. I guess I just never experienced a movie so bad that I wanted to leave the theater. You're all talking about wasting time, but if you go to the movies in the first place, you probably had some time to waste anyway. If you absolutely hate it, then fine, go get a refund. Marley and Me. The only movie I've ever walked out on, and it was because I was sobbing like a B-word towards the end, with 15 to 20 minutes left to go, and I couldn't stand to watch another minute of that emotional torture. The fourth Indiana Jones film. I walked out and went into Speed Racer and walked out of that too. It was a bad day at the cinema. I didn't walk out. I would intentionally go to see terrible movies. Why? I won 52 free tickets one year, and when my girlfriend at the time would do her photography classes, I'd go and see a bad movie in an empty theater and kill 2 hours by sleeping in the cinema if there was nothing good out that I hadn't seen already. The weekend staff got to know me and would tell me which movie had the least tickets sold so I wouldn't be disturbed. The Box, starring Cameron Diaz and James Marsden. It was aggressively nonsensical. I saw that movie with a friend and her whacked-out group for my friend's birthday. They were the typical teenagers making noise with their phones all out. No one in the half-full theater complained. Some people joined us and a couple of people walked out. Yep, 2 weeks' notice. I was a teenager with my first serious girlfriend. The movie was an excuse to get together. We bought tickets to show the stub if asked by parents. We walked in and stood up and left 10 minutes later to go make out in the car. No idea if the movie was any good, but I got to see a naked girl in person for the first time that night, so I rate it as one of the best movies of all time. This is hands down the best reason to walk out of a movie theater. Wild Hogs. I don't feel that an explanation is warranted. That Frankenstein movie with Sting in it. Walked out and I saw Weird Science instead. Yeah, I'm old. Napoleon Dynamite. I saw it with my family over Thanksgiving holiday and walked out about halfway through thinking we wasted our money. Woke up the next day and couldn't stop quoting it, so we went and saw it again. Now it's one of my favorites. My dad walked out of the cinema during Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone because it was, in his words, complete bollocks. I almost walked out of The Lady in the Water, but it was just so bad that we couldn't leave. I walked out once. It was during the Ender's Game movie. I'm able to separate my movie experience from when I read a book, but this movie was so horrible. It was appalling that it went by the same name. It doesn't help that Ender's Game and its ensuing series were some of my favorite books. I couldn't stand to watch another minute of it. I understand the merits the movie has. I also try to separate the movie and the book as much as possible when I watch them. However, I read Ender's Game and Speaker for the Dead 3 days after my grandfather, who loved them, died. Those books were an escape for me. In another low point of my life, I read the Bean sub-series, and that series is the only one to make me cry. I am unabashedly attached to these books, and I couldn't stand the movie. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.